the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of
who are being here at the start are now here. So if we're all ready. Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Firstly, just a bit of housekeeping. Everyone make sure their phones are turned to silent to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies today from the Deputy Chair, Assemblymember Harami and Assemblymember Roberts, and Assembly Members Baker and Beccaria here as their substitutes, and Assemblymember Clark will be a bit late.
Okay, excellent. So before we get to the main part of our meeting today, which is panels with TfL, with GLA Housing, and with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, we have a couple of bits of housekeeping which I will whiz through in 30 seconds. So item 2, declaration of interests. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. Excellent. Item 3, can I ask the committee to note its membership and chairing arrangements which were agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 10th of May 2024?
Noted.
Excellent. Terms of reference, can I ask the committee to note its terms of reference as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 10th of May 2024?
Noted.
Excellent. Standing delegations, can I ask the committee to note its standing delegations to the chairman as set out in the agenda?
Noted.
Excellent. Minutes, can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on November 2023, 19th of December 2023, 8th of January 2024, 9th of January 2024, and the 20th of February 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
We had a lot of meetings towards the back end of last year. We're nearly there. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, ongoing and closed actions from previous meetings of the committee?
Noted.
Excellent. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chairman under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letter to the Mayor of London on climate budgeting and the Green Finance Fund as attached at Appendix 1?
Noted.
Good. Responses to committee output, can I ask the committee to note the responses from the Mayor of London to its various letters on the GLA Group budget for 2024-25 as attached at Appendices 1 and 2?
Noted.
Great, well done everyone, we got there. So we now turn to item 10, which is our main item of business today. We have 3 panel discussions looking back at the outturn from 2023-24 GLA group budgets. And today we have 3 separate panels. First of all, Transport for London. Secondly, the GLA focusing on housing. And then the third panel will be the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime. So welcome. For this first panel, I would like to welcome Patrick Doig, who is Group Chief Finance Officer at TfL, and Rachel McLean, who is Chief Finance Officer at TfL. Good morning and welcome. So if I can lead off with the first question, which is a very broad brush one really. What were the main challenges in delivering the budget for 2023-24, and specifically in terms of delivering the operating surplus that you arrived at?
So good morning and thank you, Chair. I think overall the panel and the committee are familiar with the challenges that we have been managing for the last few years. So I would start by saying that the context for the single financial year that we're mainly discussing today is actually the context that had been in place during particularly the years of the pandemic and the recovery from that. So you'll be aware that we set a strategy that was centred around creating an operating surplus, creating the conditions for having a sustainable operational financial position. And that was also a requirement of the funding agreements that we had with central government, that we worked towards that. I'll speak a little bit about the key issues that we had to grapple with in order to get there. But you'll be aware that the headline is that we did generate an operating surplus, 138 million, in the year 23-24, which was 59 million ahead of the budget we had set. Reflecting on how big a change that is, it was actually 320 million better than the year before. It's the first year in TfL's history that we've been able to cover our day-to-day operating costs. And compared with the most severe year of the finances being affected by the pandemic, it's about a £3 billion turnaround. We did meet the test, so there was in those funding agreements there was a specific definition of what operational financial sustainability required, and we did meet that test. And every penny, as you know, of any surplus is allocated immediately into services and into investment. So the big challenges were continuing to grow passenger demand, the recovery, and to create new sources of income to continue the journey of trying to reduce our dependency on passenger income. Passenger journeys were 3.6 billion, up 0.3 billion on the prior year. And passenger income in totality grew by 20% in the financial year. In parallel, we continue to deliver our cost-saving programme so that total operating costs ended the year at 1% below the budget we had set. And in the year, we secured a further 138 million of recurring savings. So like-for-like operating costs are almost £800 million lower than they were in 2019-20 in real terms. In absolute terms, because of the rate of inflation and the way that that impacted our finances, there is a small year-on-year increase. We delivered our capital programme and finally maintained our cash reserves. The funding agreement with government required us to keep cash balances within a particular level, which we were able to do. And some of that progress was recognised by our rating agencies, beginning to return our rating status to the levels we had pre the pandemic. So those are the key issues that we grappled with during the year. I think I just close by saying that we definitely don't believe our work is done in terms of securing the financial future, and also in terms of generating an increasing amount of surplus to support the requirements we have for capital investment. So I think it was a successful year, but we are absolutely not complacent in any way. And that is our watchword. Our work is not yet done on our finances.
Okay, in terms of the obviously passenger number growth is a big part of the revenue growth. Obviously there's been sort of exceptional items lately. Firstly, the sort of rebound from COVID, and secondly, obviously, the Elizabeth line, which has been very successful in terms of passenger numbers. So those are sort of non-like-for-like comparisons, if you like, where you've got a rebound of numbers and a new growth of people on that new line. How much of the growth is those, and how much of those is left in those? And then, if you know, on a like-for-like basis going forward, what does passenger revenue growth look like, do you think?
So I think just dealing with the like-for-like firstly, so the reference point we tend to use is the 2019 business plan, so that's before COVID, what the projections were. In absolute terms, ridership is higher than it was at that time, but considerably lower than we projected. So that is mainly to do with the yet to be recovered part of the bounce back from COVID.
So just so I understand that, so the absolute level is back to where it was, but what you were predicting forward was a rising growth
Correct.
trend. So although it's back to the absolute level, it's not back on trend.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The Elizabeth line continues to perform really well. And what we're seeing in the early periods of the current financial year is the success of the Elizabeth line continuing. We have budgeted in the current year for a further growth in all areas of passenger demand. In the early weeks of that, we are continuing to grow, but we're not yet at the levels that we have budgeted for. So that continues to be a real, probably the leading area of focus for us, because this year and future years continue to require us to build that growth on the Elizabeth line and on our other modes.
So is the sort of year-on-year passenger growth that you're seeing now, it feels to me like we're in a sort of, I was going to say new normal. God, I hate that phrase, so I'm not going to say that. Things seem to have stabilised in a post-COVID state, so we're not seeing, there isn't huge numbers of people who might be likely to get back on trains who haven't been on trains in the last 6 months or a year, presumably. So we're back into more of a steady incremental increase. So that incremental increase that you're seeing now or projecting now, how does that look compared with what you were expecting, say, in 2018, 2019?
I mean, Patrick may want to add to what I'm about to say. I think there is still core growth. So there would have been year-on-year expectations of increasing numbers with population growth, with increases in workforce numbers and so on. Actually, I think we are, even at the percentage we're planning for this year, 6% in the budget, still seeing an element of recovery in that. Key issues being things like the return to the office and whether that sort of stabilises and plateaus, or whether we continue to see the number of days increasing, the number of journeys being taken. Of course, weekends have been a success story, so more leisure travel than there was pre-pandemic. So that again gives us cause, and we hope a source of continued growth above what we have seen sort of traditionally. Patrick?
Good morning. Yes, so certainly demand growth is slowing. So in 22-23, demand growth was 31%. In the year that we're talking about, 23-24, over the course of the whole year, it was 9%. As Rachel just said, our budget for the year that we're now in is 6%. So we are factoring in that slower growth. But as Rachel said, there is still a component this year that is driven both by increased office utilisation. And also we have a slight benefit from the full year effect of the full Elizabeth Line operation, which started in, I think, end of May last year. So there's a full year effect of that. So I think if you fast forward to 25-26, we'd see a further slight slowdown in growth, but still growth returning back to that core level that we've seen pre-pandemic.
Okay, that's it from me for now. Next question is Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. The papers last month on TfL's board meeting include an analysis showing an underlying operating surplus of £19 million. This is just after adjusting the £138 million surplus for DFT funding and exceptional costs. What do these exceptional costs relate to, and why would they not be expected to recur?
Thank you. So exceptional costs, by definition, are one-off in nature. That's how we classify an exceptional cost. And there are two main categories that we had last year. So first is an element of restructuring costs. That's when we make internal changes that require either implementation costs or cost of severance to deliver that change, which is then done, and then we'll deliver a recurring benefit. And the other type of exceptional costs that we have are potential settlements of commercial claims and disputes. And I think given the size and complexity and number of contracts that TfL has, I think it's natural there'll be elements of claims and disputes in those contracts. And given these are potential settlements, they are commercially sensitive, so I can't discuss the specifics of those provisions that we've made last year in this meeting. But I think there's some context that I can provide. So firstly, commercial claims and disputes can result in flows both ways. So they can result in the contractor paying TfL money, an inflow to TfL, or they can result in TfL paying a contractor money, an outflow for TfL. But the accounting treatment for those two flows are different. So we are required to recognise a liability for a potential outflow of money when that liability is probable, so just more than 50-50. But we can only recognise an inflow to TfL, an asset, if that inflow is virtually certain. So a much higher, more stringent test, which is part of the prudence principle for accounting, so sensible. But it does mean there are some expected probable inflows we have from commercial disputes that aren't recognised in the accounts, but we do expect them will help offset those potential outflows if they do arise. But a level of exceptional cost will happen each year for different items, either different claims, different restructuring. And that is why one of the reasons we hold a general contingency fund in our budget to make sure that we do have a provision for those if they do arise. Thank you.
So just to clarify, you're saying that they will recur at some point then?
So not those particular claims, but over a period of time, we would expect other claims to potentially arise and other restructuring costs may arise. As of now, there's none that we're aware of or recognised, but I think it could be possible that they arise in future. But that's why in our budget and our business plans we hold a general contingency, and that's one of the risks that contingency is held against in case those costs do recur again in future.
I also want to raise with you some learning that may have occurred from the 3-month off-peak Friday trial, which finished at the end of May. Will the policy be implemented permanently, and what impact will this have on fare revenue? And was the £147 million funding from the GLA enough to cover the costs of cheaper fares during the duration of that trial?
So thank you. So as you say, the trial ended at the end of May. The purpose of the trial was to see whether by changing the fares and running the off-peak service, it carried not only improvements or potential impacts for TfL, but more broadly, whether it had an effect on business outcomes during that period. And we're currently in the process of assessing the extent to which, through engaging with business as well as looking at data, there is, what the assessment is of the impact of that trial. So there are no further plans currently. The cost of it was accommodated within. In fact, it was budgeted as a one-off, non-recurring 24 million. The balance of that 147 million was related to the fares freeze. So it's not budgeted to recur, but we are currently processing the outcomes. But as I say, on that broader question of its overall impacts, rather than simply the impacts on the accounts.
Why was the trial at that particular time?
I think
Why not later?
So there is an ongoing, constant conversation about what are the interventions that are possible to try and both drive up revenue, passenger income, other forms of revenue, as well as reduce costs. So I think it arose at a natural moment of working through our budget rather than any other specific reason.
And it was a decision that was made from TfL, or was it all from the Mayor himself?
I think those conversations about how do you improve are constant and ongoing. I think it was a mayoral decision and a direction to TfL.
And probably the timing was as well a mayoral decision.
As I say, the conversations are constant.
I think we know the answer to that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Georgiou.
I was going to ask something else, but Assemblymember Bakari's got me interested in this line of questioning now. With regard to the Friday's fares cut, the scheme, what was the evidence and the financial business case behind it? Because as far as I can tell, there didn't seem to be the same level of extensive work that we would expect from other such freezes. So can you just outline what the business case was for it?
So I think, as I say, there is a constant examination of all of the evidence around passenger journeys. We've spoken already about some of the factors that are driving recovery. So the expectation was that it would have a positive impact on economic outcomes for the city. So that is the basis of the business case.
Just the other thing I would add is that it is, by definition, a trial. So therefore, part of the reason for the trial was to understand the impacts, to build the evidence, and then to make a decision about whether such a policy would be sensible to implement on a permanent basis. I think that's maybe why you observe a slightly different evidence base for a permanent decision that would require that higher level of evidence as you set out.
But £24 million on a whim seems like quite an expensive trial without a good, robust financial case behind it, is it not? I'm sure TfL doesn't take such decisions lightly. Well, I'd hope you wouldn't. Why did it occur in this instance?
Well, the evidence that we did have, as Assemblymember Garrett outlined, is that there's a slowing down of growth, there is a return to some kind of new equilibrium, and that equilibrium is quite clear that on Fridays the recovery has been lower than on other days of the week. So Tube ridership on Fridays was 73% compared to midweek figures of 85%. So I think it's incumbent on us and the Mayor to try different ways of stimulating demand on Fridays to make sure we're using that capacity, to make sure we're bringing revenue into the system. And that was one of the reasons that we implemented the trial.
But, Mr. Chairman, I won't carry on with this, but I do find the timing interesting. I find the lack of evidence and the lack of business case interesting. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed in what I've heard so far, but I'll carry on.
Sorry, just before you carry on, a thought has occurred to me. I think occasionally in a different guise I sit on the Transport Committee, and I'm sure we have had, I can't now remember his name, talking to us about basically TfL's models of price elasticity of demand, and which obviously, given the nature of your work, you have quite a lot of data on both of those things. Would it be possible to make sure that that information that you have, TfL's models on price elasticity, goes into the final report? Because I think that would address some of the questions that Assemblymember Georgiou's asking about. You know, what was the evidence base before, and what did we find out in this trial?
Yes, so I think you might be possibly referring to my colleague Alex Williams or Shashi Verma.
Shashi, yes.
Yes. So certainly, and we will arrange for that additional information. It is one of the things that is really important that we understand is I also have reservations about the phrase "the new normal," but those really long-standing trends and assumptions that were built into not only TfL's but all public transport models, actually are they the same given some of the behavioural changes that have occurred? But yes, absolutely, we can write with our work on that.
Great, thanks very much. Sorry, Alex.
Can I get a timeline? Because I asked for something from TfL about 2 months ago at our last meeting, and I still haven't received it. So that can I get a rough estimate of when I get that information, or the committee?
So I would certainly undertake to do it within 1 month from today. I would hope it could be more quickly, but if I could commit to do it within 1 month.
Right, thank you. The underlying operating surplus represents 0.2% of TfL's operating costs. What have you learned from 23-24 to understand what needs to be done to sustain the operating surplus into future years? I appreciate you've covered some of this already, but I think in terms of the long-term vision for sustaining that growth, could you please elaborate?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the key learning, my shorthand for this is our work is not yet done. The key learning is that every single strand of our financial performance needs to be constantly tested and challenged. And so we have a really comprehensive savings programme. We work closely with our supply chain in particular, and that has been the source of quite a lot of our success. One thing that I'm sure you're all aware of is that we are making a positive case for future support for capital funding, and in particular that is a multi-year agreement. Currently, we're very grateful to have the settlement for the current financial year, which was agreed with government in December of 2023. But one of the consequences of a single-year agreement is that we can't place long-term orders. And so there are opportunities even to build on what we have already done if we can both embed the sustainable performance for TfL on its own, but also get a more secure position in terms of external funding. So we believe there is more to do, and that's why we continue to challenge the organisation, challenge ourselves to work both internally with the organisation, but particularly with the supply chain, to look for areas to improve our cost base. We've probably spoken a little bit about the revenue side, but continuing to make the case, with all of the different cohorts who travel, so that our passenger income continues to rise at the levels we've budgeted, making sure that we deliver the safe, reliable service every single day that customers expect, and looking for those additional sources of income, whether that's through Places for London, whether it's through our commercial partnerships. Every single aspect of our income and expenditure continues to be tested, because that position we've achieved of holding our like-for-like costs is actually instrumental to our future strategy as well.
Just on the multi-year settlement point, you are obviously in a very long queue of public organisations that are asking for a change to the levels of settlement that you've possibly received in the past, and I'm glad that you've mentioned that you were grateful for previous settlements from the government, previous government. But obviously you can't get into details of conversations you're having with the Mayor and this new government, but what is the likelihood that you'll receive a multi-year settlement? And if you don't, are you prepared for that?
So, thank you. If I take the second part, yes, of course, we we'll always plan on a realistic tending to pessimistic scenario, because that's prudent. So Patrick's referenced prudence in the accounts, that's prudent forward planning. So certainly we completely recognise that this is a challenging period for the public finances, and we will need to make that positive case. So yes, we're absolutely prepared for that outcome. Having said that, the previous government recognised, along with organisations such as the National Infrastructure Commission, that TfL, in common with all public transport operators around the world, would continue to need support for major investment. When we talk about being operationally financially sustainable, that means we are funding what we call our renewals, the kind of day-to-day work that's needed to keep the network in good shape. But for major investment, there's very few people who don't think that that is the right thing in a capital-intensive organisation. And in fact, Network Rail, National Highways, the other city regions have multi-year settlements, which reflect, I think, a general recognition that it's better, it makes for more efficient and effective planning, and as I've mentioned, procurement, if you're able to take that slightly longer view. But having said all of that positive stuff, we are absolutely definitely prepared to continue on the sort of single year basis if that's required.
Can I just ask then, on this fares freeze, we had quite an interesting day, well, last year, this calendar year, previous financial year, when in the morning this committee we had a TfL commissioner here who said his view was that the £123 million cost of the fares freeze for this current year, he felt that for the 1 year fares freeze, there would be an ongoing cost of that, obviously the gap between the future trend and now the new future trend for revenue income, and then he expected the mayor to make that good. I think that's the sense I got of what he said in the morning. Then in the afternoon we had the mayor who seemed to take a slightly different view, that TfL efficiency savings might well be riding to the rescue on the 123 million. What's the sort of current position, do you think, in terms of the long-term cost of the current year fare freeze?
So clearly we're about to go into our business planning process for future years. I would naturally expect the mayor to continue to challenge us to optimise our cost savings for all the right reasons. Certainly the assumption in the business plan that we've published and our thinking to date has been that it would be recurring and would compensate in the years of the business plan for that loss.
So as in, the expectation is that this current year's fares freeze, the long-term cost of that in terms of the gap between the new expected lower revenue in each future years, that is something that TfL is, I suppose, in simple terms, that's an unbudgeted future cost. So right now, TfL haven't covered that cost. Perhaps expectation is too strong a word, but the thought is that since that was a mayoral decision, it would be a mayoral responsibility to make that whole.
That was the assumption we had for the business plan that we published. As I say, each year we have another conversation, and as I say, the mayor will rightly expect that we continue to challenge ourselves about future efficiencies.
Yes, although of course all that money could go into capital spending if the mayor did make good the revenue hole that he's created, and then you would have a much happier capital situation. Next question is Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. In May, the Evening Standard reported that most drivers hit with the £180 ULEZ fine since its expansion had failed to pay it, which meant that there was they were owed £218 million outstanding in penalty charge notices. Do you know what element relates to 2023 to 2024, and to what extent it has been recognised as income, and the extent to which it has been written off?
Thank you. So I think just in addressing this question, just start with the overall context, which I think it's important to say that it is the policy outcomes that are most important. And in terms of the finances, we see that the improved compliance is likely, well, will knock on to the income arrangements. So, but I think it's always important to start with the primary objective around ULEZ being that improvement to air quality. What we do in terms of bad debt is the income is recognised at the point the charge is raised, but we are required by law to follow a multi-stage process for the collection. The vast majority of vehicles are either compliant or they pay within the 14-day period. But for those that take longer, it can become quite extended, and that's why you get the numbers reported of uncollected amounts. But we do follow the process, and we're not alone in that. It's the same process that's used by National Highways and so on. So I think we do expect the position in terms of those collections to improve over time as we work through the extent, and just in general, of course, the net income does fall and decline in later years of the plan as that compliance assumption rises. So we are aware of it. In terms of how we do the accounting, we make a provision which is based on the age of unpaid amounts, and it's based on our history, our knowledge of people's payment patterns. So what you see in the accounts is the net of those two things. And we have that provision around all debt. It's a quite normal accounting arrangement to look at amounts owed to the organisation and to provide either for slow or non-payment. So what we do in this case is very standard and reflects the net of the enforcement income and the provision that we make.
Could you just clarify again how much has been written off, though?
I don't have the amount written off in the year with me, but I'm very happy to write.
Yeah, that would be great. And also the time all this is going to take as well.
Yes, as I say, that is a very prescribed process that has multiple stages that we follow. But I can certainly include the detail of that.
Okay, great. So, I mean, just to kind of get some explanation, can you explain the accounting and the bad debt policy for the ULEZ PCN income? But I want to know more about the reasonings behind you thinking that this has happened. So why has there been such a failure in getting those penalty charges paid? Has there been any analysis on that? Is it because of the way the ULEZ campaign was communicated, and is it because of the possible negative reaction that it got? Has there been any analysis on why there has been such a poor intake of that?
So I think just to sort of add to what I've said previously, so the policy has had very much its intended effect. Compliance is very, very high. Only 0.4% of drivers received a PCN. So what we're discussing here is, of that very small proportion, what happens in the event that the PCN isn't settled within 14 days. So the PCN is issued, there is a possibility for it to be paid at a lower rate if it's settled within 14 days. If it isn't, then, as I say, we go into this multi-stage process for collection. So this is something which, as I say, is not unique in any way to ULEZ, to TfL. It's something that occurs with other similar charges. So clearly, if there was something that were extraordinary or unusual, then it would be something that we pay attention to. But we do track it alongside the patterns for congestion.
So are you saying you expected this?
So I think when we have set the budget, we do make an allowance for late and an expectation of poor
Yeah,
payment.
but it's quite a lot of money. That's the thing that I think most people are quite surprised by. And there was a lot of conversations at the start of the campaign about how this money could be invested into environmental projects, etc. You know, where did all those plans go after that?
So the net proceeds continue to be invested exactly as intended. And as I say, we are aware that there are issues over, as I say, I must repeat this, a very small proportion of people in this category. But it is a lot of money, although, as I say, we do expect that will reduce over time as we work through the different stages of the collection process.
Okay. So you've talked about the non-payment and what that and that you were expecting that. I mean, I think you know, I think people who are watching this are going to be pretty shocked by that number and that figure, despite the fact that you were saying that this was expected. I think we'd like to see that extra analysis from you at some point, and that you can give us of why you think that is, because I think some people would believe it to be the fact that there are people who just don't want to pay it, and it would be interesting to see whether you find that as well.
So very happy to write, but as I say, please be aware that this is a process that is defined for us, that has multiple stages, and we work through them as we are required to do over time. So that figure, I'll say again, we do expect that to reduce.
Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I've got multiple people who want to come in with additional questions, but just if I might. You mentioned the stages of the debt collection, effectively, or bad debt or unpaid PCNs, however you want to characterise them. Just in broad terms, I mean, I'm assuming those stages are, you've described some of them, so you get a discount in the first 14 days, then it moves on to the full amount, and then presumably, ultimately, it proceeds through to what you take CCJ, you would look for a CCJ, and then debt enforcement. I mean, these are the normal things. Is that those are the processes, are they?
So that's broadly right. In fact, it is slightly different as it's applied, as I say, through regulations which we follow and aren't unique to TfL. The individuals, once they have received the PCN, they have a right to challenge that. There is a stage of independent adjudication. There are then stages going through what is known as traffic enforcement arrangements, which involves TfL making an application, and only after that are the sort of what you might recognise as the collection stage applied. So as I say, it really is a multi-stage process, which is why it takes time.
So roughly then how long, obviously this is not a new thing, ULEZ has existed for a long time, TfL collecting PCNs is, I don't know how many years you've been doing that, a few. So presumably you've got, in terms of at what point, let me, in the interest of time, so I suppose what I'm thinking is, you mentioned it's a very small number of people, but it's a very large amount of money. So that leads me to think, I suppose I have this sort of mathematical distribution in my head, which suggests probably some people with exceptionally large amounts share. I mean, you're talking about, what is it, best part of £250 million shared among what is probably numerically not a massive number of people. I mean, presumably you have to be at some point looking at either some pretty serious bailiff activity or writing off, big sums of money.
And sort of understanding that progression and the likelihood of payment is sort of what our provisioning analysis is about. I think just the other point to add into your analysis is that the value of the PCN increases over time. So, for example, at that traffic enforcement stage, there is, again, a nationally regulated amount that gets added to the amount outstanding. So in addition to the number and the age, it's that compounding effect that increases the value, if that makes sense.
It does exactly make sense, and I'm just thinking that, again, if it's only a small number of people that this is all compounding on, then logically, unless it happens to be, I don't know, one of London's billionaires, probably you get to a can't pay stage quite rapidly with this as it's spiralling. So, at what stage does it get to that? I mean, presumably with 6 months in or something from when these things start accumulating, you start to get to a crunch time for those people who've got very large amounts of outstanding debt, plus, as you say, the accumulated additional charges that can add up very severely. And if they simply can't pay it, you know, what happens then?
Yes, so that situation can occur. As I say, overall, we do expect to collect more of this as we get further through the stages. But the situation you're describing can occur, certainly.
And eventually, what, you take charges over people's houses, impound their cars?
So,
I mean,
again, there are regulated limitations on what we're able to do. So perhaps when I write with the way that we approach making the accounting provision, I can lay out more detail about these different stages, and also sort of the things that happen, you know, the changes in behaviour that we see as you get further through the process sometimes.
Yeah, I really would like to know, because as Assemblyman Bakari said, it's a very large amount of money. You know, in terms of, we'll perhaps get onto the capital spending in a mo, in terms of the amount of money that TfL wants and was given by government for its capital spending, this is an equivalent amount of money. And if what you're saying is correct, that it's a very small number of people, I'm thinking, what is the realistic chance of actually recovering that money versus just having to give up? You know, you end up with someone who owes £500,000 in unpaid fines and accumulated costs.
So I can absolutely assure you that giving up is not something that we would wish to do, because I completely share that perspective. Of course, that if we're able to collect this, again, as we always say, every single penny reinvested. So I wouldn't want to leave in any way the impression that we don't intend to bring in every single penny of that it's possible to collect.
Okay. It's just that is possible to collect, I suppose, is what my question's about.
Indeed.
But I suppose we won't know until we get there. I have got Assembly Member Baker.
Chair, mine on a different subject. Do you want to take any changes on this subject? Or do you want me to?
I don't know whether... I've got Assembly Member Baker, Assembly Member Polanski, Assembly Member Desai, and Assembly Member Hall all waiting to come in. So, yeah, let's go in that order.
It's fine. Sorry, I was just trying to check whether we were going to do more follow-ups on this before I swap to a different subject. And I've got some questions on outsourcing and outsourced contracts. So, just like to ask how much of the budget covers outsourced contracts like the DLR or tram contract, and also how much relates to service contracts such as consultancy and cleaning services.
Well, overall, in terms of our cost base, around about a quarter of our costs are in-house costs of paying our staff, and around about 3/4 of our cost base are through our supply chain. Now that, as you say, forms a number of different elements. The bus contracts is a large element of that, and then the other outsourced services that we have, which include both transport provisions such as the DLR and other outsourced rail modes, but also things like capita support in the operation of the congestion charge, for example. So that 75% forms a wide range of elements, including project delivery and other factors.
Do you have a breakdown of that then? Because obviously there's, I think certainly previously when I've tried to get this information, there's been a lot of toing and froing about exactly what outsourcing is and stuff, which is sort of obscured the information that I've been looking for. Do you have that broken down in terms of where those go? As I've said, of sort of examples of the contracts, the transport contracts as I've outlined, and then service contracts, which might be more traditionally called outsourcing.
Well, there's already quite a large amount of disclosure in our both our TfL budget and also the TfL submission to the Mayor's budget, which breaks down our costs under a whole range of categories, which I think would go a long way to answering your question.
Previously, I have to say, so that's why I'm asking the question. So yeah, because you've put it all under sort of a big 75%. Not staff, basically. You've just got everything that's not staff, not direct staff.
That's a slightly unfair judgment. There are about 10 lines that we break down those costs. So, but if we at least start with that, and if you could indicate what that's not doing, I think then we can look to enhance our...
I think I'm really interested in the service contracts, which, like I say, might more traditionally be called outsourcing, such as a consultancy. How much is consultants? How much is, say, maintenance staff that aren't directly employed, or cleaning services that aren't directly employed? Other facilities contracts. Do you have that under a heading or a number of headings?
Not precisely.
Yeah. Is that something that we could get?
Could I just ask Assemblymember Baker, is that something that you've previously requested?
Informally, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, we're more than happy to take that away.
Yes.
And we will do what we can to match the way that we record our expenditure against the headings that you're inquiring about.
Yes.
So I'll take that away. We'll work with colleagues to look at what has been requested previously. But we will do as much as we can to break it down in a way that you would find helpful.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. And can you just run us through the process that you might go through if you're deciding to insource a contract, like it was done with the Woolwich Ferry?
Well, whenever we are looking at a service or activity, whether it's a new service or whether it's a service that has been outsourced and is coming up for a retender, or even an in-house service that we've been operating for some time, we will perform some analysis of what the right delivery option for that is. Often called a make or buy analysis, where we look at the different options about how that could be delivered in-house and different contracting options that would be delivered in an outsourced manner. And that forms part of the business case for that decision, whether that is a decision to bring it in-house, whether that's a decision to continue to operate it in-house, or whether that's a decision to continue to outsource it. So we do those at key stages, often coinciding with the retendering point if it's currently an outsourced service.
Thanks. And we often discuss, or TfL often discuss the economic benefits wider than just what TfL's activity is. Is there any assessment of the wider economic benefits that might come from insourcing any contracts, or when you're choosing to insource, outsource, or is it purely done on your internal budget considerations?
Well, I think as in all of our business case and analysis, this would form a subset of. We are guided by the Treasury's Green Book, which is often referred to, which is the rules that public sector bodies can create business cases, which are quite prescriptive. So in there are certainly, we're able to factor in wider social benefits, because obviously that's the fundamental core of most of our business cases, is delivering that broader public benefit. But it's quite tightly controlled about the broader economic benefits that can be factored into those business cases. So I think the answer is to some extent, but we would follow broadly the Green Book process.
That's interesting. So there is certain. It's interesting in terms of when we've talked about procurement and how that can bring wider economic benefits. And is that something that you are able to factor into those decisions about contracts? Apologies for not being that familiar with the Green Book rules. Is that something that we can factor in, or is that something that effectively, if the Green Book allows us to do it, we can then say, and this is also an added benefit, or is that something that we can specifically factor in?
Again, to some extent, and again, the rules slightly differ. So there's the element that we can quantify in our quantified business case that's often expressed as a benefit-cost ratio. The rules around that are very prescriptive. But I think TfL over the years has been relatively innovative in moving things forward and factoring in other factors that we can present alongside that. So we can say, well, the core BCR is this, but there are these broader factors that need to form part of our decision making that there's slightly more flexibility. And actually that's how we've progressed some of our schemes, such as Crossrail, that we work with Treasury to make sure actually there are some broader economic benefits. Clearly the scheme will deliver. It is very right that we include that into the decision making for those schemes. So there are some elements that we are able to do that, whether it's factoring it into the actual business benefit cost ratio, or whether that's supplementing that with some additional considerations that are relevant.
That are then built into the decision-making process, basically, yeah. And you mentioned being able to take into account social benefits in that decision-making process. Could you explain how that's done?
Yes, albeit the main social benefits I'm describing are the social benefits that transports give rise to, whether that's a safety benefit, whether that's an ambience benefit, whether that's a customer benefit, whether that's a saving of someone's time benefit. So it's those that form the vast majority of the social benefits that we would include.
Is that the only social benefit that TfL would be able to plug into that decision-making process, or?
Was there a particular one that you're interested in?
Well, I'm thinking about, we've had discussions previously about that outsourcing obviously, unfortunately, provides savings because it employs people on lesser terms and conditions. And that is obviously of a negative social benefit overall if people are paid less and have less secure jobs. So I'm just wondering if that's something that is formally taken into account in that process and the budgeting process, or that would have to be as part of a wider decision-making process.
So I think the additional factor perhaps that's relevant to this, and building on what Patrick has said, is of course our responsible procurement policies, which are a requirement of our tendering arrangements, do deal with issues ensuring that the living wage is paid, that it is not widely relevant, but we have a modern slavery position, etc. And that responsible procurement policy is something that is really, really important, I think, in making sure that when we're making all of our decisions through the supply chain process, that we're bringing those minimum standards to bear on things that are supplied to TfL. So I thought I'd just add that.
No, that's, absolutely understand. But I think the key word that you said there was minimum standards. And too often when certain services are outsourced, then they remain at minimum standard. And that then doesn't provide any social value. It's pretty basic. So that's why I'm trying to understand what levers there are within the budgeting process to be able to factor sort of social value of that in.
So I do completely take the point you're making. I just want to say that I don't think our responsible procurement standards are about the minimum. I think they're about supporting as well as challenging our supply chain to get to better than minimum where they can.
Yes, but if the budgets are set lower, and the only way that can be provided at a lower value than insourcing is that staff costs are less, then that drives certain outcomes. That means that you can suggest as much as possible that it'd be better than minimum, but actually, in terms of the money, you're saying that we are asking you to provide this cheaper than it would be if we insourced, and that's just the nature of outsourcing, isn't it? So that's what I'm trying to understand, what levers there are to do that in a more responsible way, effectively.
Yeah, as I say, I do completely understand. I think perhaps just to say, each of the tenders that are made for anything that is procured are assessed on not just commercial basis, so clearly value for money is an obligation that we have to pursue, but there are service quality, there are technical requirements, and ability to deliver those responsible procurement policies. So I just want to say that, but that's not to say I don't completely get the question.
And just finally, are there any outsourced contracts or services that are currently going through the process that you might be looking to insource?
I think maybe take that away. I can't immediately think, but at any given moment, there are lots of contracts that are going through those stages of analysis. As Patrick says, at key moments, we will be testing that value for money and positioning. So may we add that to the things we will write to you about.
Yep. Thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks. Assemblymember Polanski.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, both. I want to ask about zero emissions buses. So there's been further investment in 2023, 2024. Both the Mayor and TfL have repeatedly said that this needs more government investment to get to a completely zero emissions fleet. Has there been any progress on that?
What our business plan from last year set out was that we were on trajectory to replace internal combustion engine buses broadly at the end of their contracts, which would lead us to a fully zero-emission fleet by 2034. Now, both TfL and the Mayor, even at that time, had an ambition to accelerate that to 2030, and the Mayor's obviously had his manifesto since then. So we are trying to work together and with government to see if we can accelerate that from 2034 to 2030 to meet the Mayor's targets. That does require additional investment because that means retiring vehicles before they've reached the end of their natural life, which means writing off some of those vehicles before they're fully utilised. And it brings forward the purchase of new zero-emission buses, which are, as our capability increases, are reducing in cost. Certainly the cost premium of an electric bus and a diesel bus is diminishing over time. So those two factors mean that it's quite a significant additional cost just to bring it forward by 2034 to 2030. We had previously brought it forward from 2037 to 2034 at relatively low cost, but that was the furthest that we could take it. So with the previous government and with the new government in the first few weeks, we have been in discussions about those elements, but at the moment no substantive progress has been made. But as we'd expect, discussions with the new government are at very early stages.
Thank you. And power purchase agreements, particularly for renewable energy. I think it was my colleague Caroline Russell who exposed this a few years ago as being 0.01%. Has there been any progress in making new agreements for the future?
If I may take, I mean, you're asking about the two kind of most important policies that we have in terms of our climate budget, that increasing the proportion of zero-emission buses and increasing the proportion of the electricity we consume that comes from renewable sources. Members will be aware that power purchase agreements were affected by all of the price volatility that occurred a little while back now, but it's taken a long time for the wholesale markets to settle. We do have a live procurement. I'm afraid I'm not able to say precisely where that is, apart from it is progressing. I personally think those power purchase agreements and any other routes to market we can identify to increase that proportion that's coming from renewables as quickly as we can is really important. So it's very near the top of our agenda to complete that work. But as I say, it has been quite a difficult experience because they're long-term agreements. They require investment to create new assets, and of course, it's not surprising in any way that when you have volatile prices and a lot of risk, and you're trying to reach a long-term agreement, it does take time to work through that. But it is a live transaction that we have under development at the moment.
Good to hear. And with that live procurement process, obviously I don't expect details, but in terms of timeline, do you have expected date where you might be able to update the committee?
So we are towards the latter stages. Sorry to be slightly vague, but that's because we have some approvals to go through as well as the latter stages of the process. So I won't, if you don't mind, say a particular date other than to say we are in the latter stages. But I will undertake to inform the committee as soon as that becomes firmer.
Okay, thank you very much. I have two further questions, but then more about capital. So should I hold on?
Yeah, we'll come back to capital.
Thank you.
Capital shortly. So that brings us to Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So going back to the theme of non-payment, back in May, it was also reported that foreign diplomats owed more than £143 million to TfL for non-payment of the congestion charge. The United States Embassy is a top culprit, owing some £14 million. What are you doing to address the situation and get, in your own words, a stubborn minority who refuse to pay up?
Thank you and good morning. So, I mean, rather like the discussion we've been having, it's really important that we do everything we can to collect any money that's owed to us. In fact, on this issue, I think there is consistent clarity, not only from us, but from central government, about this is an obligation to pay, and historically we've sort of had some success through a campaign of engagement with those embassies where there is more of an issue, and working with colleagues in central government, we're trying to set up the conditions to have a further campaign, because it is a very important thing to chase down.
Yes, but I mean, this issue, with the greatest respect, and probably before your time at TfL, goes back to 2003. And I think in 2020, Dominic Raab, who was then the Foreign Secretary, he actually wrote to the US Embassy, and I think there has been talk of TfL pushing this matter through the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. I mean, have you considered looking at, I'm not expert in this area of international law, but looking at domestic courts to test out the legal position? Because, I mean, you can engage for only so long. This is a big amount of money, and as I said, it goes back over 20 years to 2003.
Yeah, so you're right, that does predate me, and I mean, Patrick may have more knowledge, but I'm not aware that we think that's the, that is what we're actively pursuing at the moment, a sort of legal action. As I say, there has been success in the past through more kind of being very proactive in the way that we engage. In particular, I think we want to persuade as many embassies as possible to get onto the auto-pay arrangement so that the issue stops arising, stops increasing. And I think some of that more positive engagement is the right way to go about it.
So suppose we'll have to wait for some time before the bailiffs start knocking on the doors of these embassies.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Don't know if we can send bailiffs to the US Embassy, I think. Anyway, sounds like that could be an interesting fly-on-the-wall documentary series. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Good morning. I believe that £200 million was actually put in the budget for the collection of ULEZ money, fines, etc., or cost. That's the money that I recall going in. I'm sure it was from you, Patrick. Is that right?
That was our estimate of the expansion, the impact of the expanded zone over a 12-month period.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite neatly line up with financial years, given it went live in August, but yes.
Yeah. So was that a net amount, less of all the costs around it?
That was a net amount of the operating income and costs. So the cost of income of the charges coming in and the operating costs of operating the zone. It didn't include the capital costs of installing and delivering the expansion itself.
No. But did it include an amount for those that don't pay? An amount of non-payment?
Yes, on the basis that that was a net budget. So it was recording our net income and our operating costs. Excellent.
So what percentage had you got in your calculations then for non-collection of payment?
That's not a figure I have on me. We would have set the budget on the basis of our experience of the ULEZ zone and the congestion charge zone over the years, as well as the experiences of other collecting authorities such as the DART charge, and that would have informed our estimates.
Yeah, it's clearly a figure, though, that you had in mind that you took off the final amount. That's what I'm trying to get at. You obviously had something. I mean, on that basis, what's the ballpark figure? And I know this is all PCNs. What's the ballpark figure of the amount that you write off every year for PCNs of all their different natures not paid?
What we do in our in the Mayor's budget do disclose our total. It's called bad debt provisioning. So this is the total bad debt costs across not just the ULEZ scheme, but road discharging scheme and any other debts that we collect.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, as Rachel's explained, I think the figure is large because of the compounding effect of the PCNs increasing in value.
Yeah, no, I understand all that. I'm not looking for an exact figure. I'm looking for a ballpark figure. Are we looking tens of millions, hundreds of millions, tens of thousands? What are we looking at?
So the costs, as disclosed in our Mayor's budget, were in the order of £450 million.
£450 million of unpaid PCNs.
It's not just PCNs. That's our total bad debt expense across all schemes and other forms of income collection.
That's quite an amount of money, isn't it? And what does that, as a percentage of the money that you actually take to encompass all of those that you're not taking, what percentage of that is that 450 million?
May I suggest, Assemblymember Hall, if you're content with this, that Patrick's given that broad headline number from our budget, but it covers multiple sources of income.
No, I do understand.
So I would like, if that's okay, to take that away and write with more detail, because the other point that it's worth exploring is there can be in any given year quite a big difference between the amount that we provide for on an accounting basis compared to the amount that's written off ultimately. So I think it's important that we set out...
In a good way or a bad way?
Sorry?
Do you generally underestimate or overestimate?
Again, I'd really prefer that we write with the detail and set out the totality of the issues, as we've said.
But therefore, it's going to be either, it'll go each way then.
And it may differ from one year to another.
You know, I get that. I was only asking for a very ballpark figure. Okay, you don't have that to you. Okay.
So you're going to move on to a different topic?
Slightly.
Only just while we're on the detail, in terms of the detail that we would like, because obviously when you go away and write to us, if you write to us with things that aren't what we wanted, then we get into then a cycle of letters. So I think what we're asking for is the figures on a cash basis rather than an accrual basis. I think that's what Assemblymember Hall is after. So not the provision, but the actual amount that is spent or not spent or collected or not collected. And I think you're also asking for a breakdown of ULEZ. So obviously there's this umbrella category of bad debt, which includes lots of things. You're asking specifically about the whole ULEZ. I don't know whether there's a breakdown of inner versus outer. I know operationally it's one thing. Obviously the big change recently was outer London, so I don't know if it's possible to have a breakdown just of that. That's made a difference in terms of the bad debt that's generated?
So that's very helpful clarification. As I say, it isn't only road user charging that will be in that provision, which is why I want to take it away and break it down.
Particularly if we're going to fare evasion and all of that stuff as well.
And property and rental, etc. So that's why I want to really work through the detail, but that's very helpful. Within road user charging, I'm not able to say whether we break it down in that level of detail. But I will make that clear when we respond.
Okay, thank you very much.
That'd be helpful. And Patrick was nodding, so that's very, I can be optimistic that as Patrick was nodding, that we do have the difference between the inner London and the outer London ULEZ, because that is what the public are interested in.
So just to be clear, I wasn't nodding at that point. And
yes, you were. I was watching you with my beady eyes. You were nodding in this fashion.
As Assemblymember Garrett's explained, as it's operated as one scheme, I don't believe that would be something that we can break down.
Okay, I hear what you say.
It might be possible to use historical, because obviously it used to be just central and inner, and now it's central, inner and outer. So presumably historical data would give a sense of how much it's increased by, because I don't believe there's been a dramatic change in the nature of traffic in central and inner London. So if there has been dramatic change, would logically be accounted for by the addition of the outer London zone. So that might allow us to infer it, in other words, even if there's not an explicit breakdown.
Yes, so you're absolutely right, of course. As Patrick's mentioned, it didn't neatly fall into one financial year. And also, of course, I'm noting that a single vehicle may travel around during the course of any day. So we will provide whatever relevant detail that we're able to. I understand the question.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, Assemblymember Hall.
No, that's fine. The more comprehensive we'd be grateful for, because we are asked these questions, especially those of us that are in outer London. We are asked these questions all the time. On a slightly different point, when will the revenue expectation be worked out for the charging of congestion charge of electric vehicles? Do you at the moment have a ballpark figure of how much extra Londoners are going to be charged for electric vehicles coming into London?
So I don't have that with me.
No, the actual question was when can we expect you to have worked that figure out? Because obviously it will go into accounts. You must have an idea, I would have hoped. If you haven't now, when can I have a hope that you'll have an idea of how much money you will be taking from Londoners with electric vehicles? And I claim I have not an electrical vehicle, so it's a question that I've been asked again by Londoners.
So I can't quite remember when the exemption for zero-emission vehicles is removed. I believe it might be
It's going
next
to
year.
be Christmas next year.
Yeah, so that would form part of our budget for 25-26. So when we're meeting you in December or January discussing that budget, I think that would be a figure that we would have at that moment in time. At least as an estimate.
Yeah, I was only looking for an estimate. I was only looking for an estimate of when we might know. Okay, that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgiou.
As usual, Assembly Member Desai's raised a very good, interesting point which I'd like to explore a bit further. With regard to, the significant amount, over 30 million pounds that he alluded to, of congestion charge PECNs that haven't been paid by foreign diplomats in their embassies, or whatever the amount was, compared to the ULEZ fines, can you assure us when it comes to bad debt provision there won't be two-tier debt recovery for those people that have got unpaid ULEZ fines and those foreign diplomats that haven't paid their congestion charge?
So thank you for the question. As I've explained, we are following a regulated process which doesn't have any special exemptions, so I can give you that assurance.
Well, time will tell, because clearly there has been some special exemptions made for certain bodies since 2003, if we're to believe Assembly Member Desai, which I would not believe what he's outlined, because my concern through the line of questioning previously is there will be a discrepancy, and I'm not saying you've alluded to it, but just thinking out loud, if we're following a regulatory process, we've got the Foreign Office and the Home Office to deal with, and TfL may deal with those issues, but you literally have a battle between White Van Man and foreign diplomats. And I'm concerned that as we go down the line, you may not be able to issue a CCJ to them, but you will be able to, that working family in Sutton or whatever part of London that they're from. Do you see where I'm going with this? That as you go down that process, you may find that one group of people is a lot easier to penalise than the other.
So the precise mechanisms may vary. The intent and the energy that we will bring to seeking to collect won't vary.
But, there's a difference in the equality of the process that you're following, but there will not be the equality of outcome at the end of that line, surely.
I'm not sure I've seen any evidence which says, there are different outcomes. We pursue each stage, with the exception actually of challenges which we recognise because of people's well-being, their financial well-being, their health. Those are things that we bring as part of this policy to bear on private individuals. So I think what I'm saying is the processes may vary in some of the detail, but the application will not be more or less fair depending on which cohort.
Okay, so there's one, if I may check, there's actually one concrete way to prove this, and perhaps Assembly Member Desai and I after this can take a wager on who might be right on this. Would you be able to provide evidence to the number of people from the original ULEZ expansion, so the Inner London expansion, how many of those were completed through to a CCJ or the final payment, so following the whole process through of debt recovery, compared to those foreign diplomats since 2003? Because that would be a very good comparison, wouldn't it? You've gone through the new ULEZ, the expanded ULEZ. We haven't gone through that process yet with regard to collecting this debt. So, okay, why don't we use concrete examples that we have using congestion charge, Inner London ULEZ expansion, and the example that Assembly Member Desai outlined. That way we would know whether there is a two-tier process or not, and what the recovery rate is.
So I completely understand the question. 19 years of historic records may be difficult for us to compile, but to the extent we can, we'll definitely provide that.
Okay, so could we say 5 years, looking back at 5 years?
I think, so I don't know whether it's 5 years, it could be longer, actually. So please allow us to take that away.
Could we make sure we follow that up, Chair? Thank you very much.
That's being jotted down as we speak. So I don't see any more indications on revenue, so that brings us to TfL Capital. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So we've seen lots of organisations unable to spend their capital budgets over recent years, given a significant national context, lack of government funding, which has been highlighted. Obviously, from the housing point of view, a broken construction and housing industry and market in that area. But I was going to focus a couple of questions on Crossrail, and just to declare an interest as a regular user of the Elizabeth line myself. But we see that there is still outstanding capital investment on the Elizabeth line, on the Crossrail project. So could you tell us what it looks like in terms of capital investment that's still required and when you expect to complete that project?
So perhaps I'll start, and if Patrick's able to find the exact figures. We are very much in the last stages of the Crossrail programme. It will complete below the final level of estimates, and it will complete below the final award of funding. Before I did this job, I was the CFO for Crossrail, so that's a subject close to my heart. The reason why it's continued, as Patrick said, we will have continued to build the timetable, with the final version being introduced in May of last year. And in terms of assuring the reliability achieves what we're aiming at, there has continued to be work to make sure that the software, etc., performs at the expected level. But the programme team is decommissioned now, so we're really in those final stages of closing out the physical work. Are you able to add to that?
Well, we expect the final project costs to be completed this year. As Richard said, it's closing out the very last few contracts. A signalling upgrade has taken place this year, and there are a few very minor now claims to be resolved, but we are in the absolute final knockings. In terms of the underspend that you observe in our accounts for last year, that was necessary, given actually into the previous estimates for the Crossrail costs were slightly above our funding envelope. But as Rachel's described, due to the work of the team, we've been able to bring those final elements in below budget, and now expect to conclude the full programme slightly below the funding envelope, which wasn't our expectation 18 months or 24 months ago.
That's good to hear. Just wanted to check then, in terms of the remainder of the project, is currently already funded, or do you need to seek additional funding for that?
It's fully funded.
So you were saying about what the remainder of the project looks like, so software upgrades, just closing off a number of projects. Does that include the additional rolling stock that you're looking to purchase for the Elizabeth line? And what will it look like for customers going forward?
So the final stages of the investment programme, the capital investment programme for Crossrail, have transitioned into the core TfL, the running of the Elizabeth line, and the funding that we've received and the order that we are placing for the additional Elizabeth line trains will be managed from that core TfL rather than the original Crossrail programme.
Just to move on to other capital investment, in terms of, we've got an ambitious target from the Mayor around accessibility at stations. So what funding have you allocated to ensure that we're going to be on target to meet that ambitious target?
So I think let's start where we are. So currently over half of London's transport network offers step-free access. That includes all our modes, I think, and we've reduced additional journey time for those that need step-free access by 40%. But clearly, we need to do more, particularly on the underground. And we've got the goal that the Mayor has set to make 50% of London Underground station step-free by 2030. That commitment is obviously made after our last business plan, which had investment in there building up to £40 million per annum in our accessibility and growth fund, because actually what we're seeing is in a number of places the opportunity to put step-free access into a station is often linked with a development in or around that station. and that allows us to leverage developer contributions and other funding sources to make sure our money goes as far as possible. So trying to sequence these developments that we get step-free access, an improved station, and unlock a development is part of that. As part of this year's business planning process, we are working through how can we respond to the Mayor's target of 50%. Clearly, the more third-party funding we can bring in, the further our money will go, and the less any potential funding gap will be. But we've not yet concluded that, but that will be a feature of the business plan that we publish later this year.
So you've talked quite a bit there about development funds, and clearly, as I alluded to right at the start of my contribution, there's been a real challenge in terms of home building. So do we expect that to change significantly in the coming year or in the coming few years to be able to make a significant contribution towards this programme of improved accessibility?
Well, there have been some challenges in the house building market that I'm sure Assembly members are aware of, in particular the uncertainty around the second staircase provisions, which impacted both some of the developments that TfL was bringing forward as part of our Places for London vehicle, as well as other developments in London that we had connected investments relating to. Expecting as that is resolved, the pipeline of developments will come back on stream, and I think our medium-term outlook remains positive, and clearly we've got our own ambitious targets to deliver homes directly through Places, as well as supporting the Mayor's overall housing targets.
And final question for me is, we have been hearing about mining the financial gap. Ealing Broad A Station being significantly highlighted, the major gap between the platform and the new Elizabeth Line trains that are coming into the station. The Mayor has committed to resolving that issue, as has the Minister. But at a station like that, where there is joint responsibility between TfL and National Rail, who would be responsible for stumping up the cash to ensure that those sorts of accessibility challenges are overcome and done so swiftly?
I think the simple answers are not quite sure. I think the technical responsibility would fall with the infrastructure manager, which I think in the station you refer to would be Network Rail. But clearly there's a broader role for TfL and the Mayor to ensure that our customers are safe as well. So I think we would start with that on a legal basis, but actually look to try and find the right solution between us in a collaborative fashion.
Still on Capital, Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Bearing in mind that there's obviously a pull for capital spend, how much has it cost to replace the TfL cameras that have been having to have been replaced?
TfL does not disclose, as I am advised, it is a way of increasing the level of publicity for these activities, which are criminal and are reported to the police.
They absolutely are criminal. I'm just asking because I'm interested in the financial impact to TfL. That's what we're asking questions about. So how much ballpark figure has this cost? Because this money could be spent on carriages and all sorts. So I'm interested to know how much it would be.
As I say, and I think this question may have been asked when we were in front of the committee in December. TfL does not disclose this.
Okay.
Okay. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you, Chair. There's a £4 million underspend in healthy streets. Also, this week there was a press release from the Mayor of Transport for London. TfL makes £80 million of funding available to boroughs to help make streets safer and improve bus journey times. And in the press release, it talks about reducing TfL-led projects and moving to borough-led projects. What's driving this shift?
Well, to start with the first point of the question, in terms of the underspend you've observed in our accounts on healthy streets, I think that's a relatively small proportion of the healthy streets budget, both in historic terms, but also if you look at the overall delivery of TfL capital expenditure, we refer to other organisations failing to deliver on their capital expenditure budgets. I think we're quite proud that TfL has delivered overall on its capital expenditure, both in terms of renewals We had a very small underspend on enhancements, but that was because of some of the additional government funding we had budgeted for wasn't forthcoming, so we had to reduce to manage within our available funding. So overall, we have delivered. In terms of the second part of your question, it's a combination of two factors. Firstly, where are the locations on the road network that can deliver the most benefit in terms of safety, in terms of encouraging active travel, and supporting bus passengers. And although TfL's road network clearly is a very important strategic road network, actually it's often on the borough road network that actually has the most opportunities for those things in terms of those the improvements that we collectively want to make across London. So actually it is primarily driven by where can we get the most bang for our buck, where can we deliver the most benefit with the funding that we have. I think the second element in terms of maximising delivery and spreading out our budget across a broader pool of delivery agents also helps ensure that we're collectively using all our resources to make sure every pound of this money does not just get spent well, it also gets spent and delivers that benefits that Londoners need. So I think both of those considerations were part of that decision.
Thank you. And my final question, £4 million underspend on Healthy Streets was relatively small, but the environment part, £31 million, has been underinvested. That's nearly a third of the part, and that's money that's crucial to net zero targets. How is this affecting future investment?
So the underspend on the environment was in large part linked to ULEZ in terms of some of the challenges we talked about in terms of the cameras and the final rollout. Has been prolonged, but also the scheme overall has come in under budget in terms of the implementation costs, despite some of those challenges. So it is in part a prolongation that some of those final cameras are being installed in this financial year, but it is also in part a saving which will allow us to be reinvested in other environmental objectives.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
I don't think I see any other indications. So in that case, I have one final quick question, which is, I don't think it's public yet, but there's been some discussions that I imagine you're aware of with the GLA finance team about the changes to the draft budget that the Mayor's Office publishes in December. And I just wondered whether you had any thoughts. I believe the consultation formally launches this week, but since you're here today, I thought I would seize the opportunity. Whether you had any thoughts on the way that they're proposing to change the format of the December draft budget.
So we've had some preliminary conversations. As you expect, the GLA finance team have engaged us and the other functional bodies. I think we share the aims of what we're trying to achieve, which is twofold: to make sure the process is as streamlined as possible, so we can collectively invest our time in delivering the results rather than having to manage the process. And secondly, to ensure that the consultation material can be published in good time to allow yourself and Londoners to provide the effective scrutiny. So we have been working through some of the detail about how can we achieve those two aims of a simplified process that allows us to pull forward some of our timelines internally, then with the GLA, which then can support us meeting the dates required for the transparency. So there is still some detail to work through, but we're absolutely behind the objectives, and we believe that we can deliver on those.
Okay, that's great. In that case, I think we are all done with our first panel. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Patrick. You're free to leave. Our next panel will be from the GLA housing team, so we'll have a short adjournment of a minute or two while we change over our panel. here. I don't know who took that decision, but anyway, so if you can just make sure your mobile phones are off, but possibly displaying to you the time. But thank you very much. We now continue this morning's Budget and Performance Committee. I'd like to welcome our second panel of guests, where we'll be talking about GLA's housing activity. So we are joined by Tim Steer, who's the Executive Director of Housing and Land at the GLA, by Natalie Daniels, who's the Assistant Director of Housing at the GLA, by Heather Duman, who's Head of Area South, brackets housing, brackets GLA, and Alexis Harris, Housing Policy Manager at the GLA. So welcome everyone, and we will start this panel with a question from Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Well, what time is it? Good morning, everyone. Given the Affordable Housing Programme 2021 to 26 sets a deadline for completions by 2029, what impact are the programme delivery delays having on the feasibility of meeting this deadline?
I'll start, and then I'm sure colleagues will want to come in. You talk about kind of delivery delays, and I think it is important to recognise that delivery over the past year hasn't been at the scale of delivery in the previous year, where we were coming to the end of a programme, and we've talked to the committee a number of times about some of the challenges which London and the rest of the country face in terms of housing delivery at the moment. Is a really significant challenges, and people talk about the most difficult challenges for a generation, or as far as people can remember, and I'm sure we can come back to some of that stuff. But so the scale of delivery over the past year hasn't been at the level that we'd come to expect, but we have got going with significant amounts of delivery. So, you know, there is a lot of activity, construction activity going on in London, both as a result of starts under the previous programme and under this 21 to 26 programme that you mentioned. And so those starts that have got going, we would be confident that they would be completing by the end of the decade, as the programme requires. But it's also true to say that there will be more starts towards the back end of the programme, and we've talked again to the committee about this hockey stick, which tends to happen in these programmes where delivery ramps up towards the end, and if anything that's even more pronounced this time round because of the wider challenges that we're facing. And so we do have some concerns around completion deadlines within the programme, and that's one of the things that we've been discussing with the department over the last few months, and it may be that we that we can agree some flexibilities within the programme which address those kinds of concerns. But we're very hopeful of having, you know, we are already having a very good discussion, productive discussion with the department about what we can do to maximise delivery in this programme, and those kind of completion questions are very much part of that.
Thank you. Given what you've just said and ongoing discussions that I'm sure you'll be having with the new government and the new Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister who's taking on this portfolio, this next question sort of goes along that theme. So since 2016, the Mayor has been given a total of £8.82 billion by the government to build up to 143,100 affordable homes. This includes £4.82 billion for the 2016 to 23 affordable housing programme to build 116,000 homes, and £4 billion for the 2021-26 affordable homes programme, originally to build 35,000 homes, but since revised down to between 23,900 and 27,100 homes. Just 2,358 affordable homes were started in the 23-24 financial year, and 10,949 were completed. 1,777 of the starts were from the £4 billion 2021 to 2026 programme. This is just 7% of the revised budget target, 3 years into the programme. Between 22,123 and 25,323 homes still need to be started from this programme over the next 2 years. Now, given what you've said about the delays, and this is not the meeting to get into that, we're just talking about purely the budgetary side of things. given those issues, given that you're still having ongoing discussions about the future, how are we going to meet this shortfall, which is quite significant? And equally, how can you stand up, or the Mayor, provide a credible case to government for more funding, given what I've just outlined?
As the committee will be aware, the team and partners in London worked incredibly hard in the 22-23 financial year to deliver record numbers of homes, 25,000 homes. And in 23-24, despite the numbers, that approach has really persisted. So we are working in creative and innovative ways with our partners to maximise delivery. And I think actually, if talking to them, you'd find this, you'd think that they would be saying a similar thing. But the delivery picture that we faced last year has remained incredibly difficult. We know we've got issues around interest rates and build costs and second staircases and all of the things that we've talked to the committee about before. But we're in a position where we're having really productive conversations with the government about that, and we're talking to them about specific flexibilities within the programme, but also much more broadly about how we can support our partners to deliver homes. One thing we know is that partly because of the really significant delivery in the previous year, the financial capacity that the partners have to continue with those levels of delivery is quite constrained. And we're working with government on some of the bigger picture questions around that. What would it take to free up the financial capacity of partners and really get them back up to the delivery levels that they want and we want and that they've been used to? And things, talking to government now about how we can provide some more long-term certainty around partner income sources, like the social rent settlement, for example, like the long-term position with grant funding availability, so that partners can really commit to the scale of delivery which we need from them. And there's a lot to play for in the coming weeks and months. The government has kind of set very high ambition levels for housing delivery. We absolutely want to play our part in that delivery in London. But it's going to take that kind of shared approach where we're kind of working with government on what we need. I think if we get some of the things that we're talking to government about in terms of those in-programme flexibilities, but also in terms of those wider measures which I've mentioned, then I think we are very hopeful that we can get delivery back onto that kind of trajectory. I think we're not in a position where we're giving up on those targets that we've set as it stands. We want to work with our partners, with government, to achieve absolutely the best delivery levels for London up to March 2026 and beyond.
Well, I'm going to later, through other questioning, come on to the efficacy and the efficiency of the funding that's gone into what you've just said. But all I'd respond with, I have an ambition to lose weight, but unfortunately I love chocolate. So that's the extenuating factor there, as I'm sure we'll go on to. Last question on this bit. So in the event that the Affordable Homes Programme does overspend to meet its target, will this be covered by DLUHC or the GLA?
Well, we need to spend within our means. The government provides us with the funding for this programme, and that's the funding we have available. There's a real balancing act because, as I've said, we need to push grant rates to ensure that they keep up with the costs which our partners are facing. We're really going to struggle to achieve any delivery if we don't provide the grant rates which meet those costs. But on the other hand, as you can imagine, the higher grant rates go, the more pressure there is on that overall funding envelope. We don't have the ability to overspend in that way, so we have to plan the programme in a way which kind of gets that balance right, which maximises delivery within the envelope. I think we would be hopeful. We would be expecting to have conversations with government around where funding goes over the coming years. If the ambitions which have been set out around housing delivery are to be met, then I think funding is going to be part of that conversation. And you know, when you look at the research that we've done and we've commissioned Savills to do around what those costs are, then it's really clear to see that funding is going to be an important part of that future mix. But yeah, as I say, we need to spend within the funding envelope that we have. Yeah, please do.
And there's just one thing I wanted to add to, obviously, the figures that you've outlined are just a small part of the picture, where we've spent the last year working with partners on thousands and thousands of homes, and they're in particular difficulties in some cases. We've worked through the redesigns that they've needed for second staircases for to make, to value engineer for cost increases. Lots of those projects are now secured within the programme, and they may not start until 25-26, but there are many homes behind the sort of more limited number that have been reported so far.
Thank you. Before we proceed, actually, I'd just like to welcome students from Hampstead and Highgate who are joining us in the public gallery this morning. Hello. We'll wave awkwardly. Just to bring you up to speed, we're discussing the Affordable Homes Programme, all very smoothly and suavely, I'm told, perhaps by some of my colleagues. We're looking at the Affordable Homes Programme, which is money from the government to the GLA, which the GLA then uses to subsidise house building in London. A quick follow-up on that, if I may. The Mayor wrote to the government in 2020, I think it was July 2020, and then helpfully press released his letter, saying that GLA's analysis was that we needed £4.9 billion per year over 10 years, with a total of £49 billion. Is that still the correct analysis, in your view, of how much money we need?
Well, actually, I mean, that research was done some time ago, and I think things have changed quite a lot since then. I'm not sure that.
Sorry, for the better or for the worse? So more or less?
Well, I mean, I think overall costs have gone up since then. But I think that ultimately, if we're going to have the kind of shared plan with government that we need to build the numbers of homes that London needs and to make that contribution to the national housing aspirations that we want, it's going to be a bigger picture. It's not just going to be a funding question through the AHP. I think in all the conversations we're having with partners at the moment, you know, it's this question about the wider ecosystem. It's about funding for addressing London's building safety concerns. It's about funding for decarbonisation. It's about the financial inputs that partners get through social rent and how those change over the coming years. And I think what partners are looking for is kind of longer term certainty around that income, to give them the ability to kind of borrow in a secure way. I think they're looking for a proper recognition of the costs of investing in their existing housing stock, because what we know is that those costs directly and the constraint, you know, the forecast they're having to make for investment in existing stock directly affect their ability to plan for new delivery. And so I think it's probably about all of those things coming together, along with the affordable homes funding as well. But there is going to be a very significant funding need over the coming kind of 5-10 years.
But all of those additional factors were true, obviously, in 2020 when that analysis was done. I suppose my question is that figure, is that a useful benchmark figure, notwithstanding, you know, perhaps should be adjusted for inflation, but £49 billion over 10 years, is that, you know, a starting point for the ask?
I mean, I think it gives a sense of the scale of the challenge. I think one thing I would say is that since that 2020 research, quite a lot has happened in terms of existing stock. So perhaps the balance between funding which would go into new stock and funding into existing stock may have changed a little bit. But yeah, no, I mean, I do think there is a very significant challenge in terms, you know, London's housing need is very, very high, as we know, particularly for social rented homes, which are the most expensive to subsidise.
Understood. Okay, Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thanks, Chair. So I think the previous contributors were asking questions, specifically Assembly Member Georgiou, about the budget, as if this was completely about finances and completely taken out of the context of the bubble, as if no other external factors were taking part or happening. So you have mentioned some of the challenges, Tim, in your contributions previously in terms of interest rates, of build costs, of policy indecision, all of which were the responsibility of the previous government. Those have a huge, huge knock-on impact on what we are seeing right now very clearly in the figures of 23-24, but will take some time to undo and move on from going forward. So just want to see from you in terms of the first question is sort of the clarity of what the expectation will be from a new government to try and start to address some of the challenges and the problems left by the previous one.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. I think, as I said, I'll bring that in a second, but as I said earlier on, the challenges in the sector people talk about as it's the most challenging time ever for housing delivery. I came into this role 2 years ago in July 22, September 22, I think, or October was the mini budget, and I think that that had a very, very significant impact on a number of factors which are important to people who build housing. Interest rates clearly affect demand for housing and the ability of housing delivery partners to kind of cross-subsidise social rented homes from the sales of market homes. But equally, it has a massive impact on partners' costs of borrowing, which, again, is just this financial capacity that the constraints which partners are facing. There's a real combination of factors which come together with this. Build cost inflation, that we believe that has stabilised a bit now following the beginning of the war in Ukraine, where things went up very, very quickly. But they've stabilised at much, much higher levels, which has a big impact. We cannot underestimate the impact around the uncertainty in the second staircases legislation. We've talked to the committee about it a number of times before, but effectively the uncertainty around where that legislation was, where those regulatory changes were headed, put projects on pause en masse in the city, and it's going to take a long time for those things to unwind. So we're just getting into conversations with a new political context with officials, and I think the officials in the department have had the same conversations with housing delivery partners that we have all the time too, and so I think they understand these factors. I think they have got a good understanding about what is needed in terms of that long-term stability, certainty, and just an ability to plan for the longer term, which is what partners are really looking for. And the level of ambition amongst both our borough and our housing association partners is undimmed. It's just that they can't plan for delivery at the levels to which they've always done in the past, currently, because of the financial constraints that they face. But they would love to be in a position where over the coming months, if broader decisions are taken which would enable them to, that they can go forward and plan for those higher levels again in the future. I think that's where we all want them to be. Nat, did you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, thank you. Hello. I wouldn't play down that funding is a significant part of that. As a first thing to say, and aware that Assemblymember Giorgio has raised those issues quite rightly. And one of the longer term structural issues that is there is that over a prolonged period there's been a gradual, until the current programme, there's been a gradual diminishment in the percentage of grant funding that goes into affordable homes, and that requires other behaviours to make internal subsidy for these schemes. That's where you get into questions about cross-subsidy and how our various delivery partners have been acting to generate financial capability, which now has broader structural limitations. The 21 to 26 programme represents a moment where there was a recognition across government that was apolitical to say that needs to shift, and we need to address the structural deficit of the percentage of funding that's going in there. Because things are changing rapidly and worsening, that has not proven to be completely sufficient, and that's why that target got reduced. But the finances are an important structural part of that. The other structural thing that it might be worth addressing now, but Chair, I'll defer to you, and it might be that it's coming up in a forthcoming question, is Tim's absolutely right in all those issues he's outlined. I think any government has a very big challenge in giving the delivery partners that we are working with stability and certainty, and there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of programme that's associated with both those words that we can go into in detail, But one of the difficulties of providing those two things to the sector is about the particular operating conditions of doing this in London. We are a different city to some of those broader national delivery areas. And the difference in that city is, one why we're all here and one why we're all working for Londoners, but it does infer slightly more complicated, involved decisions. And as I say, we can go into some of the particularities of London that might affect how you stabilise that long-term position, but also, Chair, it might be that that's going to come up in another question.
So just to focus on one element, first of all, in terms of that long-term stability, one of the cynical moves of the previous government was not only to reduce the subsidy for capital investment, but also to reduce the revenue income streams for registered housing providers as well, by making them cut rents over a number of years. What would you look to see going forward in terms of that stability from a London context, so that those housing providers not only having to make sure that they can service the new developments, but also, very importantly, as you've mentioned, ensuring that safety, which is the number one most important factor, is looked after for current stock as well?
Yeah, I mean, just on your last point about safety, that is, this is a huge impact on partners' ability to deliver new stock. They're rightly prioritising the investment that's needed in their existing housing stock. They have very little choice to do that, but they don't have dedicated funding streams to do that either. And so, when they put aside in their business planning funds to do that, then that means they can't use that funding for new stock. And I think, it would be really good to see that position acknowledged and addressed, with funding availability for partners to do that investment that's so needed in the safety. I think on the social rent settlement, as you say, it's a big part of the way that partners plan their finances. It's a big income stream. The thing they desperately need more than anything else is that stability. We'd be looking, I think, certainly for in an ideal world, over time for a 10-year settlement or something like that. And that there would need to be confidence, that partners would need to have confidence that wasn't going to be changed part way through, because I think that's what's happened in the past. There's been apparently a long-term settlement, but then caps have been imposed in the shorter term, which has changed everyone's planning. I think, it's a difficult decision, isn't it, about how you set social rents. If there's a balance between supporting that revenue to support development and the impacts on people living in those homes. So balancing the impacts on people living in those homes against future social tenants. And we know how great the need is in London for social housing. So, that's a tough balance. But I think, if there was both a long-term settlement which gave certainty for 10 years and a settlement which made up for some of the previous caps, so kind of brought that rent back into in line with where it would have been given inflation over the past few years, then that would make a massive difference to partners' ability to expand their development programmes.
Thank you. And just moving on to the build cost inflation, one of the key components of this, of course, and how far the grants that we've allocated previously can go going forward. So what have we seen in terms of impact of build cost inflation in the last year or two?
I mean, I'll perhaps bring in Alexis in a moment, but just the kind of the broad picture was that, at the start of the war in Ukraine, there was an enormous inflation in build cost, construction materials, and so on. That was running at 11%, I think. There's evidence that inflation level is coming down and is stabilising, and so the prices aren't rising so fast, but clearly they're much above where they would have been otherwise, and that's where it's stabilising. So that has an impact. Nat was talking about the kind of proportion of grant as in terms of overall costs. What we know is if overall costs go up, then something has to fill in the gap, and grant has played a role in that. That's one of the reasons why we needed to revise the target for the 21 to 26 programme, because we knew that costs were higher and that grant units on average were going to need to be higher as well, because build cost inflation being one of those factors. I don't know if Alexis has got anything to add.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you've said. I think even though inflation has come down significantly, the build costs
remain extremely high. There was a report that came out in April that showed that London has the highest build costs globally, so we've just come into first place, which is not necessarily a kind of league table that we want to be on top of. I would also say there have been still a significant number of contractor insolvencies occurring across the UK, but in London in particular. So I think 4,287 contractors went bust just in the last year. And I think the final point to make on build cost inflation is that those high build costs are also being felt in London very acutely for stock maintenance and repair. So it's not only new build, but we know that real push and focus on stock maintenance, which is a good thing, is expensive. So it's also eating away at constrained budget. And just the evidence point to Alexis's last point, the data that is there shows that it's 94% more expensive to repair stock in London compared to the rest of England, which has got a whole other story about it, about stock condition, and that's why it's such a strain on the financial capacity of what we're dealing with, and new supply programs do not directly deal with that financial need. And on the point of contractor insolvencies, I think at some point in this conversation there needs to be a recognition for all of us that we're dealing with different building typologies, and that means that when one does get a contractor insolvency, if one is operating in an environment where the typology is a high grade but low complexity terraced piece of housing stock, that is very, very different to a contractor stepping in to a 14-storey building in Zone 2, where there's a lot of insurance requirements, there's a lot of building safety requirements that are more complicated to execute in those scenarios.
Yeah, really quite damning numbers, aren't they? 2,487 construction companies going bust in the last year, which tells you exactly the challenges in getting London and Britain building again. That insolvency, there is obviously significant cost to developments that have already begun under those companies, of trying to get new companies in, both in terms of capacity and in terms of cost, so well above the sort of 11% that you were referring to there, Tim. So wanted to just sort of factor that in terms of developments that have started, so their starts on the books, but in terms of turning those into completed homes for families to live in, what challenges there will be in terms of that huge number of insolvencies that we delivery partners are dealing with, and what mitigations we can put in place, both in terms of short but also longer term as well.
And it might be that Heather comes in a moment, because she's really dealing with this with her team on the ground. But just the general point that I'd make is that the team is now effectively running two programs concurrently. We're obviously trying to work very hard to achieve the start on sites under the 21 to 26 program, but equally under the 16 to 23 program. There's a massive program of work by our partners to complete the homes which they've started, and all those homes are subject to the same challenges that we've been talking about for the new starts as well. And so the team maintains that relationship with our partners throughout the build process. But yeah, Heather, do you want to give a flavour of what that looks like?
Yeah, so with essentially every partner that we work with, there's at least one. I think one of my partners has got 7 sites that are coping with these difficulties right now. And in most cases, they're working through that themselves, but they come to us with when they get to the end of the process where they can't deal with that anymore. And we're working closely with them on all possible sources of funding that they can access. Whether there's money from the local authority or from value engineering, or from possibly converting some of the market sale into affordable, and bringing that into the 21-26 programme so that we can make additional subsidy available that way, and working in partnership with Homes England and all other actors to make sure that we can assist partners as far as is possible. And we are rescuing those completions every day.
Good to hear. So just in regards to the cost of a start over the last few years, have we seen the average cost of those starts change? What does that look like over the last couple of years, and where do we expect that to go in future years?
Yeah, and just to come back to the point which Nat made about that it's not just grant here. The grant's part of the picture in terms of the overall cost. But yeah, as I say, we've made no secret of the fact that the reason why the 21 to 26, or a key reason why the 21 to 26 target was reduced from 35,000 was because we knew that we were going to have to increase the grant rates in that scheme because of everything we've talked about, and we had to be realistic about, given a constrained a funding envelope that wasn't changing, increased grant requirements, and it's different for different tenures, but as you know, we had to be realistic that meant a reduction in the overall delivery that would be possible under the programme. And one of the reasons why we've been clear about the fact that with the current funding envelope we're not going to meet London's housing need, coming back to this point about the need for additional cash is just that we know grant requirement is higher, and it's at the moment it's kind of continuing to go in one direction, but we can't just we have to work to achieve the targets which we've got, and that will put upper limits on the grants that we can offer. And talking about every day, I mean, it's every day the work is to try and minimise the grant that we're paying out on any particular scheme, because every time we do that it just allows us to maximise the overall level of delivery that we've got.
So where do you expect performance to be in this financial year coming, that we've already started 24-25, and what else do you feel can be done to improve the potential outcomes this year?
And I think delivery this year does depend a lot on the kinds of conversations we're having at the moment with government. We're talking to them both about specific changes we can make to the programme to respond to the current circumstances, but then also this much bigger picture about partner financial capacity. And if, for example, the government was able to come forward with something like a long-term rent settlement, or to come forward with certainty around availability of grant post 2026, for example, all of these things will have quite a big impact on the way that our partners are looking at their business plans. And so as I say, there's real appetite to increase delivery, but some of these things need to change to enable that. So it's quite hard to put a figure on how delivery might, if we're talking again at the same time next year, what delivery will have looked like over the current year. It is quite uncertain at this stage, because it does depend very much on those things. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, sorry. So just it feels important in the context of that delivery to say, and I think Assemblymember Giorgio talked again appropriately about what's the regulatory position and where that gets us to. And I think one of the maturations that's happening in the sector is the sector has been really pushing for new supply for a longitudinal period, especially in London, because it recognises the need, and we can talk more about that if it's helpful, about the comparison of the delivery surge that's happened in London and the benefits that's had in that period. But that has to be balanced with how there is an appropriate quality of homes delivered for people's safety. And again, I think one of these things that is actually apolitical is saying, well, what Grenfell demonstrated is as an industry, we all need to look in the mirror and say, what are we doing here that keeps our communities safe? And that is a non-negotiable set of standards. And so while there may be political decisions made around what levers can be moved and how you enable delivery within the context, we can't take it away from the context that we're working in industry that is going through a process of having the appropriate level of surety about the quality that's delivered. And what that does to the kind of baseline principle of how we perform is it means that what's in the, and Heather used the term value engineering, which is, a popular one amongst those of us in the built environment sector, and it was there when I was studying architecture at university. But there's just more in the non-negotiable box, and that is not a bad thing. that keeps communities safe, but it also means one of the uncertainties that we all have to, and a positive uncertainty in many ways that we all have to work through in this forthcoming year, is that the Grenfell inquiry should reach its conclusion, as much as that will ever be conclusion. That's a difficult word to use in those circumstances, but that might also inform how we have to have conversations with government and the sector about what delivery means and what delivery looks like. And I think as a sector and industry, everyone is committed to making sure we're keeping Londoners safe. But that features in how we think about those costs, and that features in how we sort of hold ourselves to account on what will be positive at the end of this period.
Thank you. And my final question, Chair. It's great to hear the ambition to deliver safe and genuinely affordable homes from the Mayor and also from a significant number of boroughs across London. One of the areas where perhaps we could improve in terms of delivery across the total target is about that shared ambition being more equitably distributed across the capital. You've got a number of boroughs, and I'll give my two that I represent as an example. In Ealing, where we had from 2016 to last year, over 4,000 affordable homes being completed, at the fourth highest in London, whereas in neighbouring Hillingdon, they'd completed less than a quarter of the number of homes in the same period of time. So what measures would you like to see, or would you like to be putting in place to ensure that there is a more equitable distribution of that shared ambition to deliver safe and genuinely affordable homes for Londoners?
I think one thing to say is that we're here to work with partners across London. You know, we're really keen to see housing delivery because we know that need exists right the way across London. And clearly, actually, there are advantages in delivering housing in some of those areas, you know, further out from central London, just because of some of those cost pressures that we were talking about. And so, you know, but I would say we've got really strong relationships. You know, Heather, leading on the south area, for example, will be talking to all of her kind of borough partners. And again, I think there is a real recognition across London of the need for housing and the importance of meeting that need. You know, it's been exciting to see many boroughs coming forward with huge housing ambition and a willingness to work really closely with us to try and deliver on that over the last few years. And councils have come forward as really significant delivery partners in London, which, you know, perhaps hadn't always been the case and perhaps isn't necessarily the case in other parts of the country. So there are some really positive stuff around our relationships with the boroughs, which yeah, I think we're really proud of, actually. And, you know, it forms such a significant part of the delivery in London now, in a way that, you know, that's been quite a significant change in the picture over the last few years.
And the only thing I may add to that is I know this is I might get scolded by the chair because this is a minor deviation, so apologies. But within new supply, we're focusing here on the Affordable Homes Programme, but there are other programmes that deal with vulnerable Londoners, or Londoners in complex situations. We all know there's a temporary accommodation crisis. I don't need to teach anyone here about that, but as part of there also being severe issues in the capital around with sleeping, homelessness, around domestic abuse, there are other programmes. And what I find really positive about how the whole of London is coming together to recognise that issue and address it is if you took a similar analysis but cut it across specialist programmes as well as the general supply programmes, it's really positive that boroughs of all colours and all sizes are interacting with those programmes, because boroughs generally are seeking to recognise the needs of their communities and are seeking to address them as best they can. It might be that some boroughs have got a differential in how they are set up to support new supply at scale, but I think there is that willingness to work with all of their citizens that I find really positive. And I think, as well as us giving the message that we're open to all partners, I think something that I'm really proud of what the team does, what Heather and her colleagues do, is if the limiting factor for boroughs' participation in new supply is about their confidence or capability, they work really closely in really productive partnerships with them to take them on that journey so they can get to wherever is appropriate for their communities. So we seek really hard and work really hard in how we do partnership working to make sure that that is not the limiting factor. And if it is, we support partners through it. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Heather?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some hand-holding of new people coming to the table over the last couple of years, which we strongly welcome. We're willing to invest in that time. And yes, we've got people we didn't expect to do nearly as much as they have over the last 2 years. So yes, that's been good to see. Not everywhere, but many places.
Thanks. That was quite an interesting discussion, actually, about the capping of rents and the impact of that. You see, sitting on a council, looking at the HRA, as soon as you see the artificial reduction come in, you have an immediate reduction in maintenance, ultimately leading to dilapidation and poor quality housing for people. And longer term, you see a reduction in investment because the case to build new housing doesn't stack up. And so long term, you then get more shortage, which ultimately makes cost worse. So it's interesting that the Mayor has spent the thick end of a decade asking for power to impose exactly those consequences on the private rented sector in London. I think Assemblymember Mahfouz called it cynical. I would call it populist. Perhaps we could all agree that it's a terrible idea and the Mayor should not get those powers. Hopefully his colleagues up the river in Westminster would agree with that assessment. Assemblymember Georgiou.
Natalie, can I thank you in particular for your extremely comprehensive and honest answers, in particular around the second staircase, because the one thing I detest more than anything is developers, local authorities and other public bodies that moan about second staircases and believe the GLA and the government is a charity for developers, for them to carry on complaining that they can't put in these second staircases because of viability. And it really frustrates me. And I think you've acknowledged that well in perhaps a more mild-mannered way. So I'm about to upset Assemblymember Mahfouz by getting in the way of his argument and using some facts. So of the 745.5 million that was spent to deliver 1,777 starts under the Affordable Housing Programme from 2021-26. So that translates to a unit cost of 0.42 million, £420,000 per start. If this was extrapolated to the programme as a whole, making the assumptions that the minimum number of homes, 23,900, is delivered and that starting these units continue to cost an average, once again, of £420,000 each, then the starts for the programme as a whole would cost over £10 billion. This would exceed the £4 billion funding allocated for the programme as a whole several times over without providing funding for the completion of these units. So given that, and I appreciate that, Tim's muttering away over there, whether you want to contradict that or do you appreciate that costs have spiralled out of control and look to be in the future?
No, I mean, I think there's some real complexity around the numbers which you've just set out, and hopefully Heather, as well as being head of area for the South team, she's also helping with our programme team at the moment, which looks after the programme management for the programme, and I think she'll be able to give a bit of a flavour why those numbers aren't quite as they seem on first reading, particularly around the way we pay in tranches for... you go ahead.
Yeah, no, there are two things going on. One is that we can pay for an acquisition amount to assess partners with their cash flow. Sorry, I don't know why my voice has gone at this moment. What that means for those projects is that a lot of the payments have already been made, even though they haven't counted the start yet. But what it's done is secured those starts ready for a future year. And at the same time, we're also looking to partners more widely in how the grant assists that. Because one of the levers we do have is when we pay the grant and how that assists partners with their very acute cash flows at the moment. I think I can safely say that we're not paying $420,000 per home, and we will not do so throughout this programme. The averages will be considerably lower than that and do enable us to meet the target, but whilst not in any way underestimating the cost pressures that we've all mentioned today.
So these calculations have come from the Mayor's own delivery plan from 21 to 26. So I wonder why our figures are different from yours. Perhaps we can email them. Yeah.
They're not different. It's just that we're not counting a start every time we make a payment. In some cases, we're paying for land assembly, and so we're not going to count those starts until the contract's in place and planning's in place and so forth, which might not happen until, say, early 2025. So we've made the payment, but we haven't counted the start, so you can't divide one by the other.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Understood. Thanks. Brings us to Assemblymember Bakari. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we've heard a lot about challenges, complexity, uncertainties. There's definitely ambition, but there's a lot of issues for us as our role is to scrutinise you, to get the clear facts and the clear numbers, and to get those annual targets clear for us to scrutinise. So are you confident that at some point you will be able to demonstrate the extent to which the programme is on target to the end date?
I hope that when, again, talking about where we will be by this time next year, I hope that when we're having the conversation next year, we will be able to see that clear acceleration towards the end of the programme. We, in any circumstances, we have this hockey stick, this effect where partners need to deliver under one programme and then plan for delivery under the next one, and it may have different parameters, which means they're kind of starting again in some cases. And so, we always have this ramp up. For this programme, we've had a number of issues we've been talking about in terms of the wider economic climate and the conditions for partners. It also took quite a long time to get the programme kind of signed off, and that meant that this year, the year we've just come through, has just had very unusually low numbers. And so, I hope that we're able to demonstrate this time next year that we're on a much improved trajectory, and then the year after, again, accelerating further. And if we're going to do anything like the contribution that London needs to make to the kind of national ambition for 1.5 million homes, it's going to have to go in that kind of trajectory. I'm hopeful, again, that we can have a really good idea of what a shared plan for housing delivery in London looks like, working with government, working with borough partners, working with the housing association partners too. And I hope that shared plan is paying dividends by this time next year, and certainly by March 26 when we reach the programme end date.
I think from the London Assembly's perspective, though, and our committee's perspective, the hope is really that we really want as a guarantee that there will be clearer evidence from you rather than a hope. I don't know. I think we'd like more from you rather than a hope, and a guarantee would be expected, I think, from our perspective.
I mean, I can certainly guarantee that we'll be doing absolutely everything in our power to do that. We'll be working with government, we'll be working with our partners. We're having such good conversations with partners at the moment. There is some optimism around that some of the factors which have been holding back delivery, perhaps receding a bit. We've talked about build cost inflation, that has stabilised. And there's also some optimism around just the levels of ambition and the fact that, it's really, everybody wants housing delivery in London. There's I say everybody, but there's real consensus around the need for new homes, and also there's real consensus around the need for social rented homes as well. And so that working together, we will be doing everything we can to ensure that those numbers are going in the right direction.
Okay. Well, I just want to, before I move back to the chair, just to raise one issue of concern that I had, which was the building safety underspend of £79 million. I'm sure there's a lot of leaseholders right now who are concerned about that, and I'd like just some explanation of that, and also, again, just some confidence that approach that the Mayor has promised many of the leaseholders, that there will be helpful remediation costs within so many buildings that right now are going through, and also a guarantee from us is what they need to hear. Yeah. So could you just give me a bit of background of that?
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm happy to say, actually, the underspend there is for a good reason, in the sense that there was a lot of work done over the past year to ensure that developers were paying their fair share towards remediating these buildings, and there's been a lot of work by the department on what's called the developer pledge and getting developers to sign up for that. And so I haven't got the number in front of me actually, but there was a significant number of schemes which had been in our building safety programme, which have been able to come out because developers have signed the developer pledge and will be covering those costs. So, yeah, that's why that's primarily why that underspend is there. And, you know, I think that, you know, that should provide some reassurance that the remediation will continue, but we can focus the public funds on the schemes that really need it.
Okay. I mean, there is additional support that many of the leaseholders are expecting, not just from remediation. Would you be able to see any way forward where perhaps that money could be spent elsewhere to support leaseholders in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really important conversation for us to be having with government. So effective with this programme, government provides the funding. Government's also the decision maker about how the funding's used. It's not devolved in quite the same way as the Affordable Homes programme is. But, you know, government should be seeing the benefits of some savings against its building safety forecast, because developers are taking on some of these costs. And, you know, we were talking before about, and it is not relating to cladding, but we were talking before about some of the significant building safety costs that partners are facing, and that is constraining their ability to plan for new development. And, you know, and perhaps that's one way of thinking about how some of those building safety costs could be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, it's good to hear that the wonderful work of the Conservative government has saved millions of pounds from the building safety cost of the mayor. I'm sure the mayor's written to them to say thank you. I just had one final quick question. I think it'll be quick. Hopefully the answer will be quick as well. When we talk about delivery and delivery partners, to what extent is GLA Land and Property a delivery partner for the stuff for the affordable housing programme? Because obviously that gives us much more sort of end-to-end control over delivery.
Yeah, so a number of projects on the mayor's land holdings do receive affordable homes grant. So it's not that GLAP is a direct delivery partner, because we work in partnership with developers and other partners to bring forward homes on the mayor's land. But certainly where there's a development coming forward under a development agreement with us, we've got very high levels of affordable housing required in those developments. We look for 50% affordable housing, and that affordable housing will be subsidised through the Affordable Homes programme. So there's really good close working between the teams to make sure that you know, we can get good value for money from the Affordable Homes programme on our own schemes.
So that's about sort of agreeing what's to be done. I suppose I'm thinking in terms of acceleration, you know, because obviously GLAP owns, 600 hectares or something. It's quite a lot of land. So presumably it's easier for us there to say we're not just going to agree a thing that might happen over 5-10 years. We're really going to push forward to get those homes actually delivered so people can live in them. So presumably that is a thing that is easier for us to do in that when we're talking to GLAP, or you're right, GLAP's more like a sort of middleman operation, isn't it? But presumably it does have a voice in that to be able to accelerate delivery.
Yeah.
So to what extent do we do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're on all of GLAP's land holdings, we're seeking to ensure that delivery is as quick as possible because of all the need that we've talked about, you know, and actually it can be very helpful for our Affordable Homes programme if we've got a major scheme, you know, which includes grant, and, you know, it can be some quite big delivery numbers for the Affordable Homes programme. I mean, I suppose, you know, GLAP has been working very hard recently to kind of protect delivery, because GLAP is facing the same kinds of problems that other delivery partners around London are facing. So, you know, I wouldn't use the word accelerating necessarily, but, you know, we're really trying to push forward delivery absolutely as quickly as we possibly can on GLAP land, and, you know, really happy to have other conversations around the GLAP work programme in more depth as helpful.
Great. Okay. Well, that's it. I don't see any other indications. Oh, I do. Oh, you snuck in. Go on. Make it quick. Make it very quick, because I was just about to say we're finished on time.
I know. Afternoon all. How many funding bids have been received under the continuous marking engagement? I realise I don't quite know who I'm looking at.
I don't know the exact number, but we have. We consider those bids every fortnight, and every fortnight there's projects going through and being approved, but I don't have the figures to hand as to exactly how many are coming through each time.
That's okay. Would you be able to write to the committee with the exact number?
there's information we can provide on that, yes.
Thank you. And are those projects still subject to the 2029 completions deadline?
At the moment they are, yes, but obviously, that's one of the flexibilities that we're talking to government about, to say we could unlock more CME if we could give people the assurance that if something slipped into 2029-30, that we could still fund it.
Thank you. And what proportion of funding is currently expected to go on acquisitions?
Again, I don't have that to hand, but we can certainly look at the 147 million that we spent last year and what sort of proportion that was, if that's helpful.
Thanks. I think that's
what's more important, there's a cap on that within our memorandum of understanding with government.
Thanks. And do you know what proportion of homes are set to be, that are required, will be demolished and rebuilt? I guess you don't have that figure if you don't have a figure of acquired. Is that all things you'd be able to write to the committee with?
Yes.
Thank you. Given the current cost of building, is the average cost of buying and converting homes for social rent cheaper than building from scratch?
Just say that question again so I get the maths right.
Yeah, so given the current cost of building, is the average cost of buying and converting homes for social rent cheaper than building from scratch?
There's no... Yeah, it's getting closer, but there's no... It would be remiss of me to say there is a binary answer to that question, because it depends on stock quality, geography, and route to market. So they are more similar than they have been historically, but that's a slightly complicated picture that will differentiate quite broadly.
Within that picture, though, would you consider reprioritising acquisitions under the Affordable Homes Programme to get completions moving?
I think there is certainly a question that is one of the productive conversations we're having with central government about what role acquisitions play in working through the current market, and that's partly about cost, but that is also about speed of availability and how that affects a temporary accommodation crisis that is making people extremely vulnerable.
Can I just add to that, I think we recognise that acquisitions have got a particular role to play, very much in terms of that speed question, and it is something that we've been investigating, more, and we've been doing more on. Government's provided us with some funding as well on acquisitions. I suppose the thing on the other side of the equation is that it doesn't provide additional housing overall, and that's been, historically when this programme was set up, that was really quite an important priority for government, and I think that those questions about additionality and those trade-offs are probably going to be quite important as we start to look at designing a new programme with government and where we strike that balance. But that's very much why there was an acquisitions cap in the programme to start with.
Agreed, thank you. So my final question is about mandates. So when it comes to a mandate to support the housing programme at the GLA level, do you expect it to be about affordability, accessibility and good quality?
Yes, we're working through this process at the moment, and I suspect there will be several mandates which cover the work that we do in housing and land. In terms of kind of new housing supply, we're really linking these into a set of London-level outcomes, which we have been looking to identify as the things that we should be working towards. And the principal outcome that we're looking at on new supply is affordability. But within that, we know that, as Nat was explaining earlier on, that homes not only should be affordable, but they need to be of the right quality and the right levels of safety and meeting the right needs that there are across the city.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. My apologies. You had actually indicated previously, and I'd written it down, and I put a different piece of paper on top. So there was no reason for me to hurry you there, Zach. I do apologise. But that does bring me to the end. I'm not going to look sideways in any direction. That does bring me to the end of the questions for our second panel on housing. Thank you very much, everyone. We will now have a short adjournment while we swap over and bring in our third panel, which will be the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. Hello and welcome back to this afternoon's, as it now is, Budget and Performance Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome our third panel of guests. Unfortunately, it is less of a panel and more of a person. We were due to have representatives from the Metropolitan Police here, and they have not attended. They unfortunately notified us only quite late on Friday that they wouldn't be here, which is quite an unfortunate situation for us to be in. So we are joined by Amana Humayun, who's the Chief Finance Officer at MOPAC. Good afternoon, Amana. And if we now go over to Assemblymember Hall, who is going to start off our questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're obviously going for quality and not quantity today, so it's good to see you, but I would echo what the Chair has said. I think it's an absolute disgrace that we are constantly being left with no police cover on some of these meetings, and with policing going as it is now with more and more problems, I think we should. But let's explore some of these questions, see if you've got a view on some of these things. And one of the first things I want to know what you think is what's caused officer numbers to decline in 23-24 rather than rise and slower than the target that it has in recent years. What would you put that down to?
There we go. How's that? Thank you for the question. Recruitment was slower than target, so we started the 23-24 financial year on just over 34,000 officers. At the end of the year, we're at 34,000 officers, and at the start of the year, it was about 34,500. So that reduction of almost 500 officers equates to about 1.4%. Recruitment is extremely challenging in the absence of a funded increase, and also given the cost of living crisis in London in particular. I'd say that the challenge that the Met is facing is not unique to it. So actually it's being faced across the public sector. Prisons, probation, if you look at the NHS, the nursing vacancy rate in London is about 15% as opposed to about 11% nationally. So it's extremely difficult across the public sector. I think that's one issue. So there is something around the economic climate and the pay for officers. Any increase in pay needs to be funded, and we'll see what the Home Secretary is going to do about that. But there's also the cultural issue as well. There's been, the Met has been in the news over the past 18 months or so. There have been some extremely difficult news stories. And I think that results in a slower than expected take-up of posts, both across police officers and PCSOs as well.
Yes, I'm disappointed about the numbers of PCSOs when we're supposed to have more. So why do you think then, I get the whole London thing, but then why do you think that the City of London Police have overachieved its targets?
Well, the City of London Police hasn't had the same media attention. It hasn't had the same sort of performance and reputational issues. Hasn't been subject to the findings of the Casey report, and of course its recruitment targets are much lower compared to the Met's. So I think that's a differentiating factor. The Met have launched its new recruitment campaign last week, I think, on the 18th. Be the change, so very much calling on recruits into officer roles to be part of the reform journey, and it's a campaign that MOPAC and the Mayor are extremely supportive of.
So do you think that the Met will learn any lessons from the City of London Police? Because if you're looking at the costs of coming into London, etc., obviously the City of London's in the middle of it. So there are all those challenges for the City of London Police.
The City of London Police has a significantly smaller geographical coverage compared to the Met, obviously. I think there is something around the expectations people have when they enter the police force against reality. And I think the mismatch in expectations is probably more acutely felt across the Met than it is in the City of London when you're covering 1 square mile, as opposed to, apologies, I don't know what the square mile coverage is of the Met Police. As for learnings, I feel unable to answer that. I can get a written answer from Met colleagues as to whether they are speaking to City of London Police to understand what they're doing well, what can be applied to the Met.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. Really, the other questions, they should be going to a police officer. It's not, I mean, you could answer them like I can in thought process, but we need police officers there. So I might join in after my colleague has asked some questions because there's directly to MOPAC. Again, I'm very disappointed by this, Chairman. Thank you.
I think we have cross-party consensus on our collective disappointment, perhaps more than just disappointment. In any case, undisappointingly, Assemblymember Desai, if you want to.
So, Chair, I'll move on to the next section. And
next section, all the questions that you have.
So two things. Firstly, can I just echo what Assemblymember Hall has said about the police's non-attendance here? I do apologize for you being lonely there. Chair, there seems to be a pattern developing here. We've had the same problems arising with police attendance or lack of it at the Police and Crime Committee. I know the current chair, Assemblymember Hall, her predecessor, Assemblymember Russell, have liaised with the Met about getting them to recognize the importance of being regularly accountable to elected representatives, and that's not happening. And I think that this is a matter that should be taken up by the Assembly as a whole, and certainly the Mayor as well as Police and Crime Commissioner. So thank you anyway for being here. And I would just say that the City of London does have sort of wider responsibilities than just covering the square mile, especially in terms of the fraud work that they do. But my questions are about pay and overtime overspends. And you can be brief in your answers and maybe write to us later, because there's other business we've got to cover before one. So the first question, Amana, what is the key cause beyond the higher than budgeted cost for officer pay, despite the recruitment of officers being below its budgeted level in 2023/24?
In 23-24, there was a 7% pay award, and the Met had to find 2.5% of that. The rest was funded by the Home Office special grant, but there was a 2.5 part-year effect in the course of the year. The Commissioner also decided to increase the London weighting across both officers and staff to, if you just bear with me, to a particular level. So the London allowance increased by £1,000 from 3.3k to 4.3k to all officers up to and including the rank of Chief Superintendent, and that was not funded. That had to be met by the Met.
Right, okay. And what was it, the 2.5% you referred to? Was it the grant being cut from the...
No. So the pay award, which is now baselined, the pay award in the 23-24 financial year was 7%. 2.5% of that 7 had to be funded by the Met. The balance was funded by the Home Office in terms of special grant. So that's one response to your question. I think your question was specifically about the pay, not the overtime.
Yeah, no, I'm coming to overtime.
Okay, right.
So when the committee considered the draft 23-24 budget, one of its key findings was, and I quote, uncertainty of future police officer pay awards could have significant financial impacts, unquote. Given that the 23-24 police pay award was cited as a reason that there was an overspend on officer pay, do you believe that more should have been done to revise the 23-24 budget?
It's difficult, and I say that reflecting on the position that we're in now in thinking about, well, the in-year budget. So just to give you an example, in 24-25, the current financial year, we have budgeted 2%. We don't know what the pay review body, we don't know what the conclusions are going to be of this year. It could be anything up to 5%, 6%. If that's not funded, that creates a huge amount of pressure. So how long is a piece of string? You know, we could potentially change the budget to 3% or 1.5%, but we've settled on 2% as just a reasonable level based on previous years. I think it would be What we wouldn't want to do is factor in too high an amount and then realise that that's not needed in the course of the year, because there is an opportunity cost to not spending money. So if we over budget and then that's not needed, we've potentially put aside pots of money that we could have used earlier on in the year. So I think you have to make a prudent assessment, and I feel that the assessments were prudent.
Okay, so moving on. To what extent is the overspend on police officer overtime due to one-off events like the coronation and Operation Brock? It's the policing of the marches around the Gaza situation. Or is that also an issue with business as usual operations?
In reality, I think it's both. So you're right that the overtime budget was overspent in 23-24. I think there are three factors to it. So one is genuine capacity and structural budget issues in frontline policing, in METCC, in operations and performance. I think another issue is, as you've mentioned, policing of ad hoc protests, and particularly the Gaza protests and Operation Brox. And I think, thirdly, a contribution for the Met to explain the overtime overspend was the implementation of Connect. So drop 2 of Connect went in last year, and there was a fairly significant training need, in person rather than virtual training, which required all officers to take time away from frontline, and that was covered by overtime costs.
Okay, I was going to ask about Connect later, but just coming back to the events that take place in London and that attract people from all over the country. So there's something called NIC that you're aware of, National International Capital City Grant.
Yes.
So this Assembly has consistently lobbied the government, and its position won't change even though there's a change of government, for the Met to be properly funded, especially in terms of NIC. I think the shortfall is around 160 million pounds or something like that.
23% underfunded.
Yeah. Since, I know it's early days, but has MOPAC been in touch with the Home Office, I mean, to start to renew the dialogue that you've been having with the previous government?
We are still relatively fresh in terms of the new government, but I understand conversations have commenced in terms of briefings between MOPAC, the GLA, the new ministerial teams and their SPADs, and we are certainly pushing the case for the underfunding of the NIC, which the underfunding, the 23% underfunding, is by the Home Office's own assessment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think I'm glad you're doing that, although I think we should be asking these questions of the political representatives, which we'll do in due course at the Assembly and Mayor's question time. Okay, so let me see if I need to ask the next question. It's about probationary police officers. So MOPAC's performance commentary in 2024 has flagged, quote, the high number of probationers in frontline policing, unquote, as a cause of overspending on police overtime and associated with extra costs of nearly £6 million. Why does this cost more? Is there a reason it is happening more than was budgeted for?
I believe so. Apologies, I don't think.
I think this is more again.
I might need to.
We need someone who's more on the front line.
Well. Apologies.
Yeah. Okay. Nearly there. So, you mentioned the Met Contact Centre. Let me just put this question formally. Certain areas of the Met work are repeatedly mentioned in the autumn commentary with regards to overspending on staff overtime. Forensics, Met Contact Centre, Met Detention, Public Order, and referencing and vetting. What is being done to address demand and capacity in these areas? Again, I think it's more of an operational question, but...
that there has been there's been a recognition that there was there was structural underfunding in a number of those areas, which has been addressed in the 24-25 budget. And we have now started our planning for the 25-26 budget at a senior level, so involving the Deputy Mayor and the Executive Board of MOPAC, meeting their counterparts in the Met. And part of the test is to ensure that the structural funding that we put into the budget for 24-25 is sufficient, and test whether any further funding will be needed to address those areas in the next financial year.
Thank you. And my final question, coming up to 10 to 1 chair, is how is future demand for public order policing modelled? And is this used to help budget appropriately for officer overtime and employee-related running costs, including mutual aid?
Apologies, could you just repeat the first part of that question? Sorry.
Well, I'll repeat the whole question. How is future demand for public order policing modelled? And is this used to help budget appropriately for officer overtime and employee-related running costs, including mutual aid? Again, some aspects of this I think are probably operational, but...
Yes, I wasn't here for the budgeting period for this financial year. Apologies, I was on maternity leave. But we are looking at, well, we're requesting demand modelling in our build of the 25-26 budget to take into account both the core budget and then the overtime budget. I haven't seen that information yet. I don't know if it was something that was available this time last year for the current year's budget. But again, I can get a written answer for you. Apologies.
No, don't apologize, please. Thank you for your attendance, and I think you've done your best. I've been perhaps if the civilian officers from the Met had been here, then I think we could have the information we wanted. I think what we've been told in the past is operational demands and from terms of uniformed officers, and for them not being here, and the police advisory board, as some of us would call it, that the demands of servicing them. But I think in this case we actually had the finance office invited, well, 2 officers, and the fact that neither of them chose to attend without giving a reason, as I believe, Chair, I think is simply unacceptable.
I agree with the latter part about it being unacceptable. So, Assemblymember Hall, we only have a few minutes left, so I don't want to cut too much into your question time. But just to clarify, they made it clear. So these meetings obviously aren't organised last minute. We organise them well in advance. We did invite the Metropolitan Police. They told us there was a clash with another meeting that they were going to at the Met, but they led us to believe that they would be able to attend both, if not in person, then at least remotely. And then it was on Friday that they let us know that that would not be possible. So they did give us a reason. I suppose people can make their own mind up about changes to those meetings, but I think I'll return. I think we will return to this question because it's each individual instance. There's an explanation offered, but there is a pattern, as you say, of reduced attendance. But I don't want to cut into question time. So, Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. We've been told by the Commissioner that many frontline officers are actually working in staff jobs. Are they then counted as frontline officers, but they're just not doing? So they're counted as staff?
Correct.
So has any work been done? If we have to spend £61 million on overtime from work that could be done, one assumes, by the warranted officers that are doing staff work, that can't wash its face, can it? Because if you put more of your staff into frontline policing and actually recruited the staff, you wouldn't be paying so much in overtime. So has any work been done on that? Because if you look at it as a business case, it's completely skewed.
The Commissioner, I believe, has quoted the 3,000 number. So there are 3,000 officers with frontline training currently in staff roles. I understand that is a position that he inherited, and it took some time actually to go through workforce data and identify how many individuals with frontline training were in staff posts. So I think that in itself was progress to identify that number. The Met has lobbied the government for some funding flexibility to allow changes to its workforce mix. MOPAC and the Mayor absolutely agree with the Commissioner that those frontline officers should be in frontline posts, given the issues that we're seeing in terms of officer numbers. That will then create issues in those really fundamental staffing posts. So already the staff to officer ratio is significantly below average in the Met.
I've seen it. But it's crazy when you've got warranted officers working as staff, and then you're having to pay your diminished workforce to do overtime. So if you look at it as a business case, it's just completely barking mad. It doesn't make sense. And if he inherited it, remind us how long the Commissioner has been in place?
I believe it's coming up to 2 years.
It is coming up to 2 years. So if you inherit something that is completely on a business level barking mad, it needs to be dealt with within a lot less time than 2 years.
Within that 3,000 number, apologies, I don't have the breakdown, but not all of them are deployable to the front line. So that will include officers who, for example, are on restricted duties, perhaps due to ongoing performance issues, also injuries as well. So I don't know what the actual number within the 3,000 is of individuals that, should be wanted, could be put onto the front line tomorrow.
I understand, but you see my point, and this does not make financial sense in any which way, and it certainly doesn't make sense to Londoners that are suffering so many crimes at the moment that we need frontline officers out there. I'll leave that, but I will come back to it because it's just ludicrous. You wouldn't run a business in this way, and in effect it is a business and it affects Londoners drastically. Going back to the thing that's exercising us all so greatly, can you tell me how much money the London board is costing and where that money is coming from?
Apologies, I'm not sure. I can certainly get you the full figure for the London Policing Board and its subcommittees, but that is funded by MOPAC. It's entirely funded by MOPAC.
Yeah, which
is baseline within our budget.
Yeah, but that's why I'm asking you to, with respect.
Apologies, I will. It was a part-year effect for 23-24, which is why I don't want to give you the incorrect figure. Okay. So I'll confirm both the part-year effect last year and the full-year effect this year.
I'm really grateful. If you could do that, I know the board members are paid about 15k, so if you could give me that breakdown. But also, they have an incredible amount of support behind them. So I'd like to know how much that is. And the reason I'm so vexed about this is the police can manage to go to the London board, which is made up of people that Sadiq Khan has actually put in place. They cannot find the time to come to this board, which is made up of politicians that have been elected from all the different political spectres. And this is why I'm so exercised about this. So I would like to know how much this board is costing Londoners. Well, I'm sure all my colleagues would like to know. Thank you.
If I could just respond, as you know, the London Policing Board was one of the many recommendations from the Casey report,
I understand.
and it is a really important part of the oversight process. It's the Finance and Performance Subcommittee of the LPB, where we scrutinise both the future budget, the medium-term financial plan, the historic retrospective financial performance. So I just wanted to reiterate the importance of the LPB and its subcommittees.
I hear what you say, but it's made up of people that are scrutinising something that the Mayor is in charge of. The Mayor is the Police and Crime Commissioner. He has chosen himself the people to go on the scrutiny board. Now, you have to ask yourself, is that the right way round? It is right that people from all different political spheres come and scrutinise. That's fair. What's going on with the London board is neither fair, and I want to know just how expensive it is for Londoners. Thank you, Chairman.
I think that's a fair point. I think if the Mayor got to pick who scrutinised his police activity, I don't know that he would pick us, which is perhaps a reason why we should make more. It's just so disappointing that the police choose to attend there and not here. Assembly Member Desai with a very quick final question.
Very quick one. Chair, it's not just how much money is spent on this board, but we also got to look at ways through this committee of measuring its effectiveness in terms of outputs. Something like how we ask questions of, say, for example, the Violence Reduction Unit. So I just want to flag that up. It's not just the money, but
exactly. Results matter at least as much as how much it all costs. You are correct. Okay, so on that point of huge collective agreement, I'd like to thank, it says in my script here, our third panel, but thank you, Amana, for coming along, for attending today and answering our questions. You're now free to leave. We have a couple of bits of sort of housekeeping to finish up, but you're welcome to go about your day. Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from this meeting? And can I, just going off script for a moment, suggest that one of those outputs should be a letter to the Metropolitan Police expressing our thoughts and feelings about their attendance at Assembly meetings? Can I then, moving back to my script, ask the committee to note the quarterly monitoring reports? Can I ask the committee to note the Mayor's decision lists for the period 9th of February 2024 to the 4th of July 2024 and decide whether to highlight any issues for detailed consideration? Can I ask the committee to note the report on payments over £250? Can we note the committee's work programme and meeting dates? And the next meeting of the committee will be held on the 19th of September 2024, 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 here in City Hall. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.